Yeah, it started.
Okay. Okay. So we're going to go ahead and get started then. Good morning, everybody. I see that we are recording. So we're going to go ahead and call the September ITSB meeting to order. We have already verified that we have a quorum, so great. I'll go ahead and just make some, excuse me, opening comments here. First and foremost, I'm excited to hear the agenda today. I think there's a lot of great information. I know our committees have been doing some phenomenal work, and I want to apologize to our two respective committee chairs because I didn't get to a single meeting that Tracy had, and I think I got to listen into one that Jeff had, but just been extremely busy here. I know Rocco has been doing a lot of filling in and covering down across these meetings. So I want to thank Rocco as well publicly for, having somebody from the executive committee level participating in these issues and opportunities. Just real quick, really not a lot going on from the enterprise aspect. As you can imagine, we're still all anxiously awaiting a state budget. And a little bit later in our agenda, Nate Denny, who's my deputy for broadband and digital equity, he'll talk a little bit about some of the pending legislation activities as well. If you're not aware, my legislative affairs director, Lee Jackson, gave birth last Friday to her third daughter. Mom and daughter are doing great. Eva Lee is the newest addition to the Jackson family. So we're going to miss Lee tremendously over the next couple of weeks as she's recovering and doing things that she needs to be taken care of. But we're going to go ahead and cover down. And again, Susan Coward here has been doing a great job of filling in as where she can, helping out. And then likewise, just keeping me in tune as to things that are going on as well. With that said, just real quick, the biggest thing that we probably had across the enterprise here, and this is really across the cabinet agencies, excuse me, is the governor's executive order as we look at COVID, which is essentially having employees provide proof of vaccination or commencing with weekly COVID testing results. We went live the day after Labor Day with an enterprise system here. As with any large effort, it had a couple of rocky moments as we took the plane off and got into the air, hit a couple of air pockets, but we are now pretty much smooth sailing. The interesting part about this though, is it's really shown us the amount of disparate legacy data that's existing across all these systems that continues to get promulgated, and really made it extremely difficult to start pulling data across disparate systems for us to get to an enterprise solution. As in case in point, my agency is not even reflected in there as Department of Information Technology. We are still reflected as the Office of Information Technology Services, which I understand went away about 6 years ago. But that data continues to get promulgated across the board. So as we look at modernization of IT systems here in the state over the next couple of years, we really got to start taking a hard look at our data sets, and do we truly need to keep bringing forward all this legacy baggage, if you will, into the newer systems, and can we get to a place where we can do some things a little bit differently? So I know it's kind of like being on the soapbox a little bit, but I do want to throw that out there. Before we also move on to our committee reports, also excited a little bit today to be able to share with you our statewide strategic plan. I'll kick that session off, and then Sarah Porper, who's our Director of Business Strategy, did a yeoman's effort on pulling this together, and then likewise revamping the agency's strategic plan from a 31-page document down to a 1-page document as well. So we're excited to share that with you, get feedback from all of you on that plan, and again, get your thoughts and considerations into that. So with that, that'll end my comments, and I'd like to go ahead and move into the committee reports. So again, Tracy and Jeff, thank you so much for all you've been doing on this. Again, I've been reading the outputs from the meeting minutes. I'm really excited to hear what you're all going to present. And again, Rocco, thank you for doing everything that you've been doing to attend those meetings, because I have not been able to. Just want to confirm, is Rocco on?
I'm here.
Okay, Rocco,
Good
before we
morning.
move on to committee reports, is there anything you'd like to say, sir, as our vice chair?
Well, Jim, I think that the folks have done a tremendous job on the committees. I'm just very impressed with what we've pulled together on this. Look forward to hearing it in, the whole thing put together now.
Okay, great. So I think first up is Tracy. I'm going to talk about something near and dear to me, digital transformation.
Great. Thank you so much. And Jim, you said you hadn't attended any of our meetings, and that is certainly true. But boy, you couldn't have set us up better in your opening remarks for what was much of our discussion throughout our several meetings on digital transformation. That leads us to the creation of what we're calling a draft digital transformation roadmap. I want to start by mentioning we had a fantastic team. We had 3 members of the ITSB. Who are all current CIOs in business, education, or state government. And then we also were joined by 3 experts from outside of the ITSB. These all had extensive experience leading large organizations and IT teams through digital transformation. Rather than introduce them at the beginning, we'll introduce them as they go along, because each will provide maybe a couple of words in one of our slides as we go forward. I do want to take a second to remind you that you all have the full document to refer to, and this presentation really only includes a few highlights. I also want to say again, this is a draft, so we in no means, even though it's a pretty fulsome document, we in no means intend for that to suggest that it is complete and doesn't need changes or input from you. We'll get to that input in what I hope will be about 15 minutes after we run through about half a dozen slides, and then we'll invite your feedback. I want to say first, though, that the earliest feedback that we got, you see on this slide. In our very first meeting of the committee, we had a breakout of the Digital Transformation Committee about 3 months ago in this meeting. And the first question, I believe, came from the state auditor, and that was to make sure we made really clear what exactly is digital transformation. So what you see here on this slide is kind of a pull-out one-sentence quote that reflects what we believe digital transformation is and means for us, which is basically creating better outcomes, connecting the people, places, and things throughout the state. If we can go to the next slide, what I'll do here is just sort of run you through on the left the format of the report, the sections of the report, and then maybe talk a bit about one or so of the sections, but not go into great detail. Again, I refer to the document that includes about 9 goals and objectives under 3 major headings. So in that context, I would say first is the context of the report, which elaborates on the digital transformation definition more fully. I also want to point out and commend to you to read later, part of that context introduces within about the first 3 or so sentences this notion of the separate and siloed aspects of state government, and our perception as the committee that worked toward considering and promoting what digital transformation would be, our perception that significant siloed nature of state government is actually a significant potential inhibitor to digital transformation for the state. We say that from the perception of the users of the state, and we would urge that perception of the users of the state is the central ground truth that needs to drive what we're thinking about here. After context, we have scope. We'll come back to that in a second. Vision and mission. These are exactly what you would expect, and you've seen in lots of documents, very, very high level, short statements, aspirational statements that would guide the effort. Regarding scope, I would highlight here that we do cast our remit as statewide, not just, so to speak, DIT and what it needs to do, because they cannot be successful without this being a statewide effort. So I'd like you to pay attention to that section on scope at some point. But for a little more on scope, I want to call on Keith Collins, who's one of the non-ITSB members of our group. He brings expertise as CIO at SAS, recently retired. And he really got us started with our roadmap by highlighting the sort of what we might call the triumvirate of the importance of education, business, and healthcare that drives most of the definition of what we propose in the digital transformation roadmap. Keith, you want to give us a few words on this?
Sure, Tracy. I appreciate it. I think when we first started our conversation, we said, well, what's going to be sort of the driving factors around economic impact? And so we boiled it down to, businesses come and stay in North Carolina for talented citizens, and people come and stay at North Carolina for good education, growing businesses, and amazing geography. So that was sort of the place where the committee started from. And then to focus priorities, we say, well, if we're going to drive economic impact, what would the three big things be? And we sort of took that down to the number one thing being driving long-term economic and equitable impact. I think equitable is a good one here, was to automate and integrate systems that support education. And we know through our conversations that that one's a really tough one. But we do think that one might be the one we want to put at the top. The second thing I think was, how do we facilitate businesses? So how do we make it easy for businesses to get started and to operate? So starting and maintaining businesses was our second. And then the third was, how do we improve the lives of citizens? And that really led us to what can we do to make it easier to facilitate the healthcare systems? So those were really our big three: education, facilitating businesses, and then healthcare.
Thanks, Keith. This took us then into a deeper dive. So if we can move to the next slide, we then went on to describe what we called the purpose, some of the driving factors, and the principles. Again, full materials in the written document that you all have. The summary is about 3 pages, and then there's another 3 pages or so that go into deeper detail on the goals.
Hey, Tracy, can I ask a quick question on your principles? Was there any conversation around constituent control of their data?
Yeah, we didn't describe that explicitly as a principle. We do have that as one of the goals, and we'll talk about that in the third strategy a bit. So we'll get there, Jim, and can come back later as you need it. But we do believe it's very important, and the transparency and awareness of what that data is, as well as obviously the privacy. When it comes to the driving factors, the one thing I do want to stress from that section is the expectation that everyone now has technology at their fingertips and always available services. This really creates a crucial demand that in many ways is behind the scenes, but it is an important area of goals that we describe around automation and the integration of systems. So this is essential, even though it should largely be hidden, so to speak, from the constituents. The principles, as Jim asked about, they're intended to be the framing high-level decisions and actions that help guide the choices that will unfold along the way. So, for example, data changes in one place gets reflected in others. Tina, I'm not sure if Tina.
I'm on.
Yes, fantastic, great, thank you. She had a little bit she was going to share with us. Tina's one of the non-ITSB members of the Digital Transformation Committee, and she's the former CIO at RTI, and she's now managing director at Google Cloud. So she has some thoughts for us from her perspective.
Yeah, so just to lean in a bit, and thank you, Tracy, and hello to everyone and good morning. So one thing that I look at is from the lens of the tech and all the tech companies that are looking to move into North Carolina. And there are several right now that literally call every day to say, why should I move into North Carolina? And what are you doing about technology? And how are you going to be the leader in technology if you want us to all come? So I think as I look at it, it's through the lens of how are we going to make North Carolina a place that people see as up and coming in the technology, industry standards, platforms, and tools are effortless, easy, and that they can plug in quickly, and it's seamless across the state. So wherever they're coming from, they feel that this is going to be the best tech hub there is. If you think about it, we have the most amazing schools there are. People are taking the talent that is in North Carolina and pulling it out, and we want to pull it in. And the way to pull it in is get the companies here and to look at this from literally how do we standardize and get a technology roadmap from North Carolina that is seen worldwide as this is the best place that is delivering technology that's easy, effortless, and can be used by all. So that's the lens that I'm coming across, that we have to be able to articulate all the way across to every company coming in, our constituents that are using it every day, who, by the way, are probably employed by a lot of the tech companies. And it's easy to use in the agencies such as our schools, because that's also where that people look when they're coming in from technology. How are the schools? How's the government? How's the technology? Is it easy to use? Are they forward thinking? And are they looking ahead to where we can be with them on their journey? So that's the lens that I'm looking at.
Thanks, Tina. Appreciate that perspective and your passion around this. If we go to the next slide, this lays out the actual 3 high-level strategies that we have. As you'll see, they are pretty general. The hope and expectation is that they would span over 5 or so years, maybe longer. Each of those would have goals and then particular projects under them. Those might change more frequently, but we would expect these high-level strategies to be sustaining for quite a while. That first strategy is around what we just mentioned, the enabling and underlying systems and thoughtful integration of them, and how important that is, even though it's sort of under the covers. Doing this requires that we break down silos, which leads us into goal 2, and having the state government largely writ large work on common solutions rather than everyone introducing their own solution. Together, these empower the constituents who use the systems and the importance and the ease of use of those systems and the security of those, which is our third goal. So with those 3 high-level goals, I don't need to introduce Jo Abernathy. She's the CIO of Blue Cross and Blue Shield. She's a member of our ITSB board and on our Digital Transformation Committee. Jo, did you want to share a bit with us about high-level goals, given some of your experience on strategic planning and otherwise?
Sure. Thank you, Tracy, and good morning, everyone. You know, one thing that I wanted to highlight on this summary slide where we talk about the 3 areas, in particular, I know as a taxpayer and a private citizen, you know, I have raised concerns about the sort of siloed nature across all the agencies. And I think that one of the things that's important to remember in digital transformation is that people tend to underestimate the importance of changing people, process, making sure you have strong collaboration. I think that's certainly going to be a challenge for you, Jim, and your leadership team. There's actually a fantastic book, if you haven't read it, called The Technology Fallacy. And the book is about how people often go to technology when they're trying to do digital transformations, and yet they don't look at how they execute work, how decision-making is made, how teams collaborate, and then they think that the digital transformation is a failure because of technology. But technology is often the easier part when you're truly trying to transform. So I just offer that as someone who has personally struggled with this in my experience, and also just I think it's a critical success factor for the state going forward.
Yeah, and Jo, I would echo your comments. You'll often hear me talk about, when we talk about digital transformation, it's not about the technology. The technology's there probably in many cases already in place and established. It's the people process components that we need to overcome that end up being the barriers to us moving forward. You know, as I'm looking at what you have here, I'm curious because I mean, Tracy, you as a large university CIO, you have an ecosystem that kind of would maybe not to the same scale as what we're talking about at the state and local government level, but still you need to do these types of components as well. Have you seen this approach work well for, or first off, have you done this approach within Duke at the university level? Has it worked? And then the other question too, as I'm getting some messages from some of my team listening in, is the fact, you know, we probably ought to include a theme here about digital equity. And even though we're going to talk about broadband a little bit later, you know, some of the points that Tina made earlier on about not watching our, you know, keeping our people in, not watching them exit our state to other opportunities. We also have to have a theme of digital equity probably somewhere woven into this as well.
Great. To respond quickly, so we can keep moving, Jim, and invite fuller feedback. Absolutely, we've used strategies like this at Duke. In fact, I often describe being the CIO at a large university like Duke as almost an ecosystem that's like a small city or a government, because we've got everything from, you know, police forces to sporting venues to
the healthcare.
Right?
Yeah,
we've got it all. So we need to weave all those together. I totally empathize with the situation you find yourself in, which is the decentralized and separate nature of everything. We work with that. We struggle with that all the time. We have great success with it, though, by building trust. The building of trust starts with the fundamental delivery of underlying services, because if people don't think the underlying services are really bulletproof and relevant, then it's hard for them to say they will do more on a strategy side with us. But once we get there with underlying services being bulletproof, great, and people having trust in us, then what we try to work on a lot is what we call technical functional partnerships. My organization runs the technology, and then functional business units actually own and drive the process. We found that to be a huge and important approach to delivering this kind of transformation, because then it puts IT where it should be, behind the business needs. But the business needs likewise are resonating with what IT can do and going to them for advice, not going outside to third-party vendors or consultants who might each be promoting 50 different solutions. So that sort of technical functional partnership we don't describe here, but it is one that we have used in practice at Duke.
Okay, thanks, Tracy.
Great. If we head to the next slide, and with thanks for Joe for introducing that. We're getting to the end, only another slide or two here. But in this slide, we talk a little bit about an idea of the detail behind each of the goals. And again, they are more fully described in the 3-page document and the couple of page appendix. I note here again, it is a draft. We have 3 goals that we set out for each strategy. They are again pretty high level. We won't drill into them here in detail. The appendix to the document that you received has a deeper dive into each. And for each of the bulleted items here under the 3 strategies, it has 3 sections, sort of the 0 to 18-month efforts, the things we think can get started and are the earlier wins or earlier efforts to pursue, either because they're ripe or because we think they build the right kind of confidence or underlying capability. The second section under each of the bullets is a 3 to 5 year goal state. The idea is we don't want to define everything along the way, but let's define the beginning and let's define where we see it down the road, with goals then changing out over time. And then the third section would be what we have under each of these as what we perceive as potential roadblocks, places where either the siloed nature, the need for deeper dives into privacy, the need for legislative reform could be potential roadblocks. I stress these are all our external assessments. I do mention, though, that even though it's an external assessment from our committee, we've been able to do some knitting together of what we describe from that external viewpoint with what we would call the ground truth, with the help of Glenn Poplawski, who's really helped us a lot through the process, making sure that we don't come in as outsiders proposing things that are completely ridiculous, as opposed to that might be hard and a stretch goal, but it is possible. We can understand how to pursue it. So with that, I might ask Keith Briggs, who's also a member of the ITSB and on our Digital Transformation Committee. He spans both worlds as the agency CIO with the Department of Insurance. And he's been involved with projects like the constituent portal that you see under the 3rd strategy here. Keith, can you share with us a thought or two about this?
Yeah, absolutely. First, everybody, good morning. Happy Friday. Hope everybody's getting ready for the weekend. So Tracy did a great job setting this slide up. Again, it's a continuation of kind of the message we're building here. She represented all the areas well. One of the things that I benefit from being as part of the state is I do participate on the digital transformation committee that's in the state that focuses on the constituent portal. I'd like to take one moment to kind of paraphrase a line that we developed in that committee to kind of represent what digital transformation is for us as a citizen. And that is, consumers of our services shouldn't need to understand state org charts in order to identify and utilize a service that we provide. So for us, if our focus is really about simplifying how does a consumer, whether or not that's a business or a citizen or somebody that's looking to vacation in our state, can gain a service, use a utility or whatever through that constituent portal, then we've succeeded in transforming our services to their benefit. I have to say that I'm really confident about the IT strategy board working on this particular work stream, because we already have a complementary work stream within the state also focusing on it. We have a number of agencies already working together to try to identify some goals, look at some areas that we can begin working on right away. And I think those two things will complement and support each other as we go forward with this.
Thanks very much, Keith. If we can move to the next slide. I think we've gone one too far, sorry. Can you go back one? There we go, outcomes. The next part, after we introduce the 3 strategies and the goals below those, we really conclude our document. We talk a bit about the outcomes and the conclusions. I've listed the outcomes here, and our hope throughout this has been to focus on the very high level outcomes for the state and its constituents. Again, not for DIT, right? So we're viewing this as something that is statewide in terms of its focus and organization. The conclusion section is fairly straightforward. It does try to give a nod and mention to the important role that the state CIO is going to have in coordinating this activity. I would also acknowledge here, as we conclude and open for discussion, that Glenn has played a really essential role in helping to get us here. And again, we hope that this digital transformation roadmap stays as digital transformation. We try to be careful not to leak into, so to speak, other parts of what the state needs to do that we believe are exceedingly important, things like access to broadband, right, and otherwise. Jim, this might bring us back at some point to the question of how much of digital equity do we appropriately include in this plan so that we don't overstep our boundaries, so to speak, and get into your larger strategic planning efforts and activities. But we're eager to hear those comments. Before we kind of move on toward feedback, I don't know whether Ann Hungate has been able to join us yet. Ann, are you with us? Okay, Ann is the 6th member of our Digital Transformation Committee, and she is also not a part of ITSB. She's the president of Daring Systems, and she brings a lot of expertise in helping organizations with digital transformation. She had a urgent conflict that arose just late last night, so she will try to join us in about 15 minutes or so, but I just wanted to be sure to introduce her so that when she chimes in, and I know she will, she was a very active member of the group, we'll be able to invite her comments more broadly on this digital transformation question. If you can take us to the last slide then, Julie, if you're driving, thank you. Really here, we just want to open up now and invite your feedback. I stress again, everything in this document is a draft. We recognize that it's a significant bit of work or looks like something that may be more finished and polished. It's not, so please, please give us your comments on it, and especially note that the appendix gets into a little bit of the more gory details of how we would suggest that the state look at nearer term activities and efforts. We'd be grateful for your comments as we invite that feedback. I do want to stress that our aim, again, was a document that could guide and advise the state with an intention that as we move it from this draft roadmap to a finalized one, that we sort of hand it off to the state and they can then work toward identifying the specific goals and efforts under those strategies or under the strategies that we modify with your input today. And that the Digital Transformation Committee sort of takes a step back, moves to the sideline a little bit, and lets the state CIO direct and manage the efforts along with his very capable team. So with that, and recognizing the clock is chiming 9:30, I will stop speaking and invite all of you for your input, feedback, comments, and guidance that I know you will have to provide to us.
Yeah, so first off, I'll chime in here. So Tracy and team, thank you so much for the effort you put into this. I don't know if you can see, but I've been smiling the whole time and beaming. You will see in our enterprise strategic plan, you will see digital transformation. You will see a lot of the themes that you talked about. So when I talk about digital transformation, to me, there's some foundational items. We need connectivity. We need to talk about cyber, not cyber necessarily from the securing of systems, but also some of the elements that you pointed out there as far as how do we uniquely identify the residents, the businesses of our states, the tourists of our states as they're trying to engage in services. The third area is around privacy, and you had some of those themes in there already. And then lastly is, if we going back to your first step about the underlying infrastructure and technology base, to me that's cloud, and how we as a state need to start transitioning, moving, and migrating to the cloud as well. So I think you covered that. I'm disappointed not seeing get the state CIO an easy button and it all goes away. I know we got a lot of hard work here to do. Because I think this really it's going to challenge our agencies. I'm fond of saying that our agencies have done a great job of getting online, but we are not digital. And we're not digital because we're not looking at it from the perspective of the individual that we're trying to service, and the hoops and hurdles that they need to go through. Glenn's heard me say this already. As later as he's going to talk a little bit about the constituent portal. If we're going to develop a portal, the default can't be Google, right? If it becomes so cumbersome, Google becomes your state's default portal. And more than likely, most people will go out to Google, search, and try to find the answer to their question. And we all know sometimes how accurate the internet is with data. And we don't need to be misleading our residents as well. So again, thank you so much for this. Others here as part of our committee, questions, comments?
I'll just say, being from Google, we appreciate you not blaming us. I'll just put that out there for the moment.
No, you don't have to worry about that, Tina. I probably use Google search engine more than I probably care to admit. So
that's okay. And I apologize if I stepped on anyone about to speak. So
Jim, this is Keith. I think there are two interesting conversations that we had as a committee that we talked about. In fact, the importance of good search, because portals tend to get stale quickly. So actually an investment in good search technology for the state's important.
Okay.
And then the other thing we talked about was your question about equitable. And one of our points of conversation was making sure that we didn't get lost in just getting broadband everywhere, but making sure the investment was for enough education, enough capability to connect to the broadband, and the ability for the citizens to actually use the broadband if they had it.
Yeah, and you'll hear those themes, Keith, when Nate Denny, we get to that part of the agenda, because we talk about accessibility, affordability, literacy, and enablement as some key themes there as well. Rocco, I see you lighting up. Are you trying to say something, sir? Or?
Actually, I was, Jim. I'd be interested in if you could give us a little bit of perspective that you might have. Obviously, for this to work across the state, you're going to have to join forces with all the other CIOs in the different departments. Can you give me a little background on where you are with that and those folks and how well you think this is going to come together? Obviously, execution is going to be everything in this, and it's not going to work unless everybody's on the team. How are you with those folks?
Well, I would take it a notch up even further yet, Rocco. For us to be successful to start doing some of these things, and I've had conversations underway with the General Assembly, as well as within OSBM, the financial model for the agency here needs to be radically different for us to be able to go forward and do these types of things. Too much of my budget already constrained. It's about 85% of this agency's budget I can't do anything with.
Wow.
And that does not allow me to do things like innovation or even more important, deprecation of legacy services. So I'm encouraged by that there was a budget proviso, at least in the House budget, that the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee would work with us to sit down and begin to look at the financial model for the agency with recommendations for how we best move forward. So I got some areas there. I also got some areas to address the financial model. It starts easing up the burden in other places, because today I have staffing that's constrained. I can't move staff to where I need to because they're tied to a revenue source or to a particular funding source, as the case may be. It's not a sustainable model for us to be able to move forward and do these types of things. And that also includes then the interaction with the agencies. And I'm not going to necessarily say agency CIOs, but it's the agencies in general. And one of the things that we're trying to get implemented here probably in the next few weeks, as we look as a DIT internally as to how we're going to do some restructuring of our assets, is really around IT governance. And you're going to start hearing some of those themes as we talk about the strategic plan here. How do we prioritize? How are projects getting funded? What's the transparency behind that? How do we start taking a better look at how do they align to not only the enterprise strategic plan, but more importantly, the agencies and what they're trying to achieve from a business aspect. And then likewise, looking at what our current capabilities are. So we're not starting to build in silos. We're starting to take more of a state holistic approach as we move forward with application modernization effort. So
Okay.
I probably did not answer your question directly. It's only month 6, Rock. But we are making some great strides so far, in at least trying to get. We know what the problems are. I'm not going to sit here and tell you I know all the problems. I mean, every day I lift up the rock and wish I didn't. But now that I lifted the rock up, I know what's there, and we have to go address it. But most importantly to me is if I can get the financial model significantly changed to allow us to start going forward and doing the things that I think the reason why this agency exists, as opposed to being focused on revenue in, revenue out, that type of an approach. We're not adding any value in IT in that type of a model. But for us to be able to innovate, to enable agencies to go accomplish their business objectives, and more importantly, be able to deprecate legacy technology and not have the last person holding the bag for the full cost of that service because they can't get it off. Yeah, there's a lot that we can do there, and that's what I'm hoping to work for or move forward with for the next couple of months.
Thanks,
and cyber is one of those too. So all 4 of those things that we were talking about, broadband, cyber, privacy, cloud, all those themes are all wrapped into that, and we're kind of hamstrung a little bit in our ability to maneuver because of the financial model at the moment.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Jim, I would invite you or others, if there are roadblocks that are significant ones that we had missed and not understood as we went through our articulation around the different goals, happy to include those and incorporate them. We don't want the document to be obviously limited, right, in its value by not identifying roadblocks or by misidentifying them or getting the wrong strategies or goals down. So we invite comment and feedback from others as well.
Okay. Jeff, I thought you were lighting up there for a little bit too, as Rocco and I were talking. So, do you have a question?
No, well, there's first start with a comment, and not to speak for others, and we've had conversation, but absolute kudos to you for accomplishing something that I actually for a while didn't think we would accomplish, which is making this committee viable and valued. It's taken almost 2 years to get here. A lot of changes, obviously, in DIT and other things that impacted that. But what the work Tracy and your group's done, this is absolutely magnificent. This is one of the main threads and missions of this group is envisioned when we put this body together back in the legislature. If I hear the goals, if I was to re-articulate them, it's, how do we automate education and systems in that support it? How do we facilitate business? And how do we create an easier life for our citizens? I think those are so critically important, and there's so much conversation around it. Things when I hear you guys talk about having the available technology or capabilities at our fingertip, there's been discussions for a while, and the first thing my reaction is that says, okay, people can conduct all their business with the state, citizens, through their smartphone is the ultimate device, because that's where everything functions. And with that in mind, if that is a goal, this is spot on. I see something in there that's embedded, talking for kind of re-paraphrasing it, is we're going to focus on looking for COTS type solutions, commercial off-the-shelf solutions, quit custom building everything, which has been a 30, 40-year history. And we have wasted millions and millions of dollars doing that, at least at the application level. Obviously, tools and stuff, we don't do that. Super important focus that you guys have identified. The whole, because of the duplication and replication, we've got 30 plus departments. We'll get into that impact on the cybersecurity side as well. All the CIOs report directly to their secretary or the head of that agency or department. That's problems, we know it. So looking at organizational structure is important. Nobody's been able to actually quantify. We looked at it about 4 years ago, trying to figure out what the actual IT spend is in the state. In ballpark, it's about 2.6 to 2.8 billion. That's a big number. And there's so much duplication and across that and no coordination, which is one of the reasons for elevating this department to a cabinet level position. Really important that we get the governance right and the budgeting right at some point. And I think the legislature anticipates that and expects that. I would assume the governor as well. So just kudos for this work. I mean, it's actually freaking amazing. The one last comment I would make, and it's just a subtle one, is it referencing One North Carolina is actually the formal name of a grant incentive program to entice businesses to relocate to the state. So that may be one we want to tweak whatever we reference that, because it may confuse people with the fund since that's been in place for a while. But again, I just want to tip my hat. This is definitely headed the right direction.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Great.
Jeff,
Great
before we get to
comments.
Tina, I was going to say, you must have stolen all my crib notes because a lot of the things you just talked about are activities we have underway, especially around identifying our spend and being able to articulate that spend across a common taxonomy that we can now benchmark against as well. So again, that's another one of those little small assignments that Sarah Porper is going to be working on for me, because I can't tell you what a BTD 091 report. I saw the Madam Auditor's on here. She may know what that report is. I sure as heck don't know what that is. But if you can tell me what my spend is in compute, what my spend is on platform, what my spend is on software, what my spend is on contracted services, and we get to those common categories, now I can start articulating a different viewpoint and perspective at the state level. And then how does that help us move forward in our strategy? So yeah, so I'm going to be talking less about the strategic plan because Jeff already covered a lot of it. Tina?
Yeah, one last thing I'll leave. It's just a thought. And I have lived in 5 other cities and 5 other states. The one thing that I've seen that works well is you have a lot of tech companies here, and you have a lot of people that are willing to lean in to be able to help with funding and with projects to make this successful, because we live or die by what the state of North Carolina does. You serve the citizens that we want to bring in. So unless that we are more advanced or seen that way, like in Austin or Palo Alto or San Francisco, the more that companies are going to lean in to those states versus North Carolina, which is fundamentally the perfect place everyone should be located. So because of that, I would encourage you to lean in to those different large organizations that are here or planning to come here, and see what technology they can help with, provide you with, and resource in order to make this happen. Because we are all invested in North Carolina.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's a very valid point. And again, and I see Rob Maines on the screen. We're not going to lose out to Texas, especially Austin, right, Rob?
Exactly. If
We already
nothing
have a
else, but for
barbecue.
the
There's already a barbecue bet going on with my counterpart in Texas. Joe?
Yeah, just a quick comment, Jim. Thanks for that blank check, Tina. That's pretty exciting. I like that.
Yeah, let's don't take that too far now. I said all companies, all
Hey,
companies.
Joe, go search blank check on Google and see what you get.
I know we need to keep moving. I just wanted to offer up one thing that I can send out to the group that I was actually sharing with my team is IDC recently published a research paper, and they talked about how the pandemic really created new digital first habits, and it cuts across all industries. And their theory is they're not going back, right? So they posted some interesting statistics on both veteran digital users and how digital interactions have gone up as a result of the pandemic, but also first-time users. And the study said it really kind of raises the bar for all businesses around what people now expect. So when we talk about the citizens and what they're going to want and need, it might just be interesting for you as you're trying to talk about, adjusting the budget construct or whatever. As an enabler, you could show the importance that's cutting across all industries. It's just interesting, and I can send out the couple slides to you if you like.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you, Joe.
Hey, Jim, one other comment.
Yes, sir.
And I don't know if everyone's aware, they may be, or some will be, but as we roll out the strategic plan from DIT in this area, all the departments, agencies, almost, I think everyone that I can think of off the top of my head, all have their own individual strategic information systems plans. So when we're looking at activating and automating education, DIP will have. So how do we dovetail? Those will be important. Facilitating business. Now you got Commerce, you've got Secretary of State, you got DOR, perhaps the Auditor's Office. They all have strategic plans. So our ability to influence or make sure they overlay properly without creating, lack of a better term, Chinese railroads that don't meet when you start from different coasts, those will all be issues you guys will have to tackle.
Agreed. Yeah, and that's one of the things, Jeff, too, as we're looking at the agency strategic plans, we're hopeful that within the agency plan, there is a technology plan that's going to show how it's supporting the agency objectives. But again, going back to how we onboard projects and fund projects, I think if we can start getting more at the front door and getting more involved there, and how we evaluate and recommend projects that should go forward or not go forward, and be very transparent about it. One of the things for a future session with our IATSB members here really is to maybe sit down and start looking at how do we effectively evaluate a spending request for an IT project. What's the criteria that we should utilize to evaluate? And then more importantly, what's the weighting criteria of that as well? And so we could probably come out and maybe do a ranking, if you will, of projects to give to OSBM for consideration. That says fully fund, partially fund, don't fund at all. And there's going to be extenuating circumstances. You're going to probably have a project that has a low value, but it has 90% federal funds associated with it. That might be a difference maker to enable that project. And so it's not like black and white or you're very clear cut. There's going to be some room, but at least there's objective criteria that can be used now to how to evaluate effectively an IT effort and make recommendations on whether or not it should be funded or how it should be funded. So again, that's probably for another upcoming project as we look at our ITSB moving forward. I still see Tracy, you've had your hand up for a while here.
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of chime in on the comments by Jeff and Joe about doing anything from your cell phone, your digital device, and the importance of thinking about those systems in a different way. I was absolutely stunned when I learned how many people apply for Duke jobs using their cell phone, because I think about it old school as, you need a keyboard, you need to enter a fulsome amount of data and information. So I might suggest, again, this is perhaps apart from the digital transformation, but it may end up being connected, Jim. It might behoove you to think about a small ad hoc group of 10 very young people in the state who could just give some thought about how they think about interacting with the state, how they think about what they would do and what needs to be transformed. Because I will say we utilize students all the time to drive our projects because they think about it in a completely different way than we do. And if we're using the skate to the puck analogy, right, some of your digital transformation, we need to be ready for the people who will be after it in 2 or 3 years.
So Tracy, you're saying I don't qualify as that young person.
I am saying no one on this call qualifies. Sorry about that.
But sincerely, your point is
22.
Yeah, your point is extremely valid. I can tell you in a previous state I was in a large city in that state, the preponderance of residents in Seattle did not have necessarily a computer at their home. It was a smartphone or a tablet. They didn't have cable. They were more like doing more streaming services and that type of activity. So when you think about emergency broadcast messages and the traditional way that we get emergency management messages out, again, you also had to think about all that omni-channel type connectivity out to them. The last comment I'll leave you with, Tracy, along those lines too, is when we talk about broadband, you'll hear me, I know that the industry loves to use the term last mile. You'll hear me use the term last user for that very, very reason you just said. It's about connectivity to the individual. It's not about connectivity to a brick and mortar location. And while we focus a lot on fiber and the advantages that fiber is going to be bringing, we have to accept the fact that people want to get connected on whatever device they have at any time they want to get connected, wherever they're going to be at. And so to your point, more and more folks are leveraging a smartphone. In fact, when we did COVID Safe, we did, it's device agnostic. We optimized the experience because the operating assumption going in is we're going to be doing this from our state employees are going to be utilizing phones. They're going to be utilizing their tablets, as an example. When we looked at it from an HR and what HR needed to do, we optimized it for a desktop experience, because more than likely that's where the preponderance of the work was going to be. So we are trying to take care of that. But really what you're honing in on the end of the day is really around personas, right? That is something that, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, when we embarked on a similar effort there, it really was focused around 8 personas of what are the things that people are coming to government for. And interestingly enough, the number 1 use case was a son or daughter moving back to take care of elderly parents. And then you start thinking about all the things that someone has to consider when they're coming new into the state. And the first thing everybody focuses on is, I got to change my driver's license and my motor vehicle, my vehicle registration. And really, the question was, in Pennsylvania, do we want Department of Transportation to be the welcome mat? Is that the experience we want to have people experience? Or how do we start doing business differently so it's not going to the DOT offices to execute that? You think about school districts, employment, childcare. Where are our services available through the AAAs to enable services to my parents? There's a whole litany of things in that one use case that folks we lose sight of. So great point. Anything else for this group before? And Jeff, I know you got to just bounce for a couple minutes at the top of the hour. Should we move on to something else in the agenda and let you come back so we're not, or?
It's okay, because the call, I've got, the call will come in at 10 o'clock. The bank is calling me, and then I have to authorize the wire transfer, and it'll minutes, but I don't know if we can either, I don't know what else in the agenda that will take maybe, 10, 15 minutes or so, and then we can start.
Yeah, why don't we just go ahead, because that way we give you your fair opportunity for the value, the stuff that your work group worked on. So why don't we skip ahead to the statewide strategic plan?
And Jim, as we do that, can I just do a final shout out to?
Oh, yes, please
Julie,
do.
Yeah, just Julie Brenman, who her name isn't listed as a member of the group, but with Fountain Works, she really kept it together and got us to this point. So even though you're heaping credit toward us for what we produced, I want to be sure she's known as somebody who made it happen. And thanks to Rocco for his help too. It was a great committee. I appreciate all of you.
And again, so for the collective team, thank you so much for you set the bar high. Why don't we go ahead here now to the statewide strategic plan? And Sarah, I'm assuming you're online somewhere and come on camera.
I'm here.
Okay. Here. Oh, yeah, there she is. So when I was first transitioning to North Carolina, and Sarah knows this, and I kept looking for what is the state's strategic IT plan, and what I kept being given was a 31-page document that was focused on Department of Information Technology. And while that was a fantastic document, by the time I got through page 5, I was at the point where saying, I'm not going to remember page 4 by page 22. And I'm the kind of person, I had a great mentor. His key theme was small words, simple sentences, and a pretty picture will get you a lot further than a 31-page verbose document. And so coming here and sitting down with my executive team and getting Sarah involved, it was, how do we come up with a statewide IT strategic plan that is for the entire enterprise? This is not DIT's plan. This is what we're all working for across the IT community, regardless of the agency that you're in. And first and foremost, we have to have a vision statement here. So, I do work for the governor, so I want to be respectful of our council state members as well. But I think we can all get behind. You'll often hear Governor Cooper talk about an equitable North Carolina, a prosperous North Carolina, a educated North Carolina, and a healthier North Carolina. And so everything that we're doing should be keeping in mind from a vision perspective, how does IT provide that kind of capability to our agency business partners, regardless of where they're at, into achieving those type of objectives. From a mission perspective, again, I know that as an agency, there's been some trust issues over the past, and I can't go back in time and fix things. But moving forward, we really need to start having trust, and we have to recognize that we as IT exist to enable the business. We are not here to drive the business, and we're not here to tell the business what to do. Clearly, that's why there's other members in charge of agencies that are focused on those business needs. We're here to enable those businesses to be successful. And if I can get Secretary Boyette or Secretary Cohen or Madam Auditor up on a stage on the national award level receiving accolades, then I did my job because they were very successful in what it is that they did. When you think about it from a priority aspect, the governor was very clear with me in the early conversations. First and foremost, it's about broadband. And I don't think there's wide bipartisan support. There's really not a lot of disagreement between the governor and the General Assembly on the importance of broadband. Maybe some of the functions that we talk about, from accessibility, affordability, and literacy enablement, there may be a little, some small disagreements on some of those things, but really everyone recognizes the importance of broadband. We all lived through it in 2020. Hopefully we don't have to relive it here coming up in 2021. But we do know that a significant portion of our population is sitting on the wrong side of the digital divide. Going back to Tracy's or Teeny's comment about, we have to make sure that all our people are available. They're part of the digital highway. They have the opportunities to get the education that they need. So we continue to have a ready-made workforce here in North Carolina as businesses continue to move in. Cyber, number two. We can and need to do better on cybersecurity as a state. There's been a lot of phenomenal work here, and look forward to hearing Jeff and the cybersecurity teams report out here. But we need to look at cybersecurity as well. And then thirdly, as part of that, the other side of the coin, or the companion to cyber, is privacy. And we need to start understanding what the privacy rules are that are coming across the country. Privacy is not just a West Coast thing anymore. It is across the country. You've all heard me talk about just up north on the other side of the border in the Commonwealth of Virginia. They now have a privacy law in place. Colorado signed one in. There's a bunch of other states still looking at privacy laws as well. And a lot of it we have to start taking account for is what GDPR is going to require. And then when you look at consumer protection rights, and there's going to become a point in time, which is why I asked the question about constituent control of the data they're providing to an agency. There's going to come a point in time where some of these privacy laws are also going to be applicable to public sector as well, more so than just private sector. So if you think about it, a resident of our state could potentially come in and say, I'm no longer receiving benefits or services from XYZ. I want you to authenticate that you removed all my data, and my data is no longer sitting in your systems. What would be the ability for us today to sit there and say, I know where all of Jim Weaver's data is across all the disparate systems that exist in state government? I don't know if we could do that or not today anyway. And then lastly, you'll sit there and you'll see digital transformation being a focal point, and we talked a lot about that already, so I won't get into more details of that, but the themes of connectivity, cyber, privacy, and cloud are all fundamental to support the digital transformation effort that I think we need to make here in the state, and our work group members, and we have to weave in some of the things that they've identified and pointed out as well. So with that, I want to let Sarah go through our statewide goals. So what we have is goals. We have the objectives under goals, and what you do not see yet are measurements and outcomes. Or I should say outcomes and measurements of those outcomes. We are working across our CIO community to help them have them help us identify what those outcomes should look like and what those measurements would be, so we can actually start measuring progress against the plan and start showing the needed value of the plan and the difference it's making in North Carolinians. So Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. First, I just want to say how excited I am that the two committees that we have working for IT strategy with IT strategy board are two of our top priorities. I think it'll lend a lot of credibility and give it the emphasis it needs, not just with the agencies, but with the General Assembly as well. So thank you for participating in those. The other thing you'll note is I'm not going to go through all of these objectives because all of you can read, but what I wanted to point out first and foremost is, so the first goal is predominantly broadband. It's connectivity, and then it's those things that we can do as a result of being connected. So enhancing 911 capabilities, or telehealth, or helping with digital learning. But the other, and so that's a priority, and it got its own goal because it's a huge emphasis, and it's kind of fundamental to everything else. But cybersecurity and digital transformation are across all 5 goals intentionally, because we wanted to make sure that we were keeping those things in mind with everything we do, not just in, okay, you're working on cyber, but if you're working, you should have cyber in mind. We also want to make sure, so I can talk briefly about the goals. We talked about foster connected North Carolina. That's predominantly broadband and all the things that go with it once you are connected. Transform the delivery of services is partly changing the way we DIT deliver services, but more importantly, the way we IT across the state deliver services to the business. And that could be anything from investing in an authentication services, a modern authentication service, to what Jim mentioned earlier, which is the funding model. So if currently we are a cost center in multiple agencies' budgets or funds, and we're seen as a cost instead of as a value add. So once we've changed the way we're funded, and we can start to change the way we look at IT and show how a business could benefit from us getting a small amount of funds to enhance something, whether it be for digital transformation or otherwise. Right now it's just, oh, how much is it going to cost? Instead of, oh, you could do that for us. And I think that once we can flip that conversation, we'll be much more successful in IT and as a state as a whole. Optimize and secure the state's IT portfolio, application portfolio. Many of you have been involved, whether you're the state auditor or a former legislator, with frustration about our application portfolio, and that we don't really know what we have across the board, or what's about to retire, et cetera. And from Jim's perspective, he's spoken a lot about converging IT, and without an understanding of the portfolio and understanding all the pieces and parts and how it fits together, it's really hard to make informed decisions, whether it be what to retire next, how to prioritize projects, or how we find redundancy and synergies across the portfolio. And then the promote an inclusive and innovative workforce sort of speaks for itself, but many of you have mentioned things about the workforce, not only the workforce within the state, but the workforce outside of state government coming to the state. If we don't come up with a way to retain a diverse workforce that we have, but also attract new people, we're going to have a really big problem going forward. And again, back to the idea that IT is a cost instead of the value it brings, we need to figure out a way to empower our employees and allow them to collaborate, not just within an agency, but across agencies, to gain ideas, share ideas, and gain synergies. That's the main point in that. All the bullets kind of revolve around those. And then the last is data analytics. We've talked a lot about how important data is. We have a lot of it. We have a lot of very valuable data, but we don't necessarily use it the way we could or should to make informed decisions, nor do we leverage it to help empower the citizens to do what they need to do. And if we can figure out better ways to use that data, we will all be in better shape. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're trying to accomplish. Jim mentioned that we're working with the agencies to come up with measurable outcomes. Part of that is that we've looked at all the agency plans. We're looking at both the agency business plan and the agency IT plan so that we can see make sure that the agencies are focusing on those things that are important to the business, but also that they map up to what we're trying to accomplish here, and we're looking for ways to measure that. So any of you have ideas or suggestions on how to do that would be greatly appreciated. And
I'll jump in here on a couple comments, Sarah. So thank first and foremost, when we talk about transforming delivery of services and the optimization of our application portfolio, what we need to start focusing in on is business risk. I'm not sure our agencies are aware of the risk that exists within the IT platforms and applications they are consuming on a day-to-day basis for mission critical items. So we need to do a better job across the IT community to start identifying where that business risk exists and making sure that we are having the appropriate conversations with the business leadership, not IT to IT, but with the business leadership, so they have an understanding of what the vulnerabilities are, what their risks are, which will also help maybe potentially enable some reprioritization of activities as well. The second thing that really want to hone in on is the word transparency. I want to get to a point where we are very transparent with our IT application portfolio, our spend, and our progress or lack of progress. I think once we get to an era of transparency where everybody can see what is occurring, there is a certain level of responsibility that starts getting put in there, and we start driving to different outcomes. This is something that in a previous role that I had, we did very well. It was publicly available. All IT projects, a $1.6 billion spend of IT initiatives that were out there were all tracked. They were all publicly accessible. Legislative members would access it. Fiscal research would access it. Yes, suppliers and vendors would access it as well. But it was out there, and there was that level of transparency was very much needed for accountability purposes when we were going through and looking at progress or lack of progress on projects, and whether or not there came a point that we should consider stopping a project and canceling it altogether. So transparency is another theme. And then the last area I just quickly want to talk on is around the promote the inclusive and innovative workforce. We know that we have a lot of folks today doing jobs that as we transition to the cloud, as we transition to new technologies, the roles they're performing today will not be the roles they need to perform tomorrow. We need to get in front of that. We need to start enabling those training opportunities. We need to take our current employee base and allow them the opportunity to reskill, retool, re-equip, and get prepared for what the technology landscape is going to look like for tomorrow. We do not need, as an example, a lot of people watching servers and monitoring servers. There's a lot of automation tools that do that. There's also a number of providers that do those types of activities at a very attractive price point. So why are we taking our most valuable commodity, our people, and having them perform those types of functions? Let's move those people over into areas that's going to really drive a lot of value and benefit in our state, helping us with strategy, helping us with project management, portfolio management, enterprise architecture, cyber, privacy, business relationship management, supplier management. These are much needed skill sets that we do not have anywhere near the number of people that we need, because a lot of our folks are focused more on the day-to-day stuff. And there's an importance for doing the day-to-day stuff. I mean, we're not going to get rid of that altogether. And I'm not trying to trivialize or minimize day-to-day stuff, but I want us as the IT community in the state driving strategy, not necessarily our vendor partners driving our state's IT strategy. And so I'm trying to make that paradigm shift here within that column as well. So I think I'll open up to comments, questions. I see Jeff's back, so I think we killed enough time. So any comments, questions, feel free to fire away here, folks. Okay, everybody loves the green, orange, white colors, right? No. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. I'm not hearing anybody. So, oh, go ahead, Jeff. You're muted, sir. That's $10 in our IT jar.
There you go. And you couldn't get it to unclick. Only comment from this, I love the idea that it's really a holistic approach across the whole state, which we've never done. I think one of the barriers, if you will, for DIT will be they're still thought of as just providing the plumbing. And that's got to change without a doubt. The foundational things, and this is particularly for the CIOs that are on listening, would be interesting in their perspective since I haven't done that role for a long time. But it strikes me one of the foundational things while we're conducting the day-to-day business is to go back and document an enterprise architecture for the entire state. I don't think anything exists or has ever been documented, even to a level, and this is probably old school, which will show my age, but I don't think anybody has created, and I'm not sure many organizations do anymore, kind of a level 0 data flow that would document the data model. So we could actually see data usage and authorizations and where for centralization, distributed uses of data across the state and across departments. And I'd really be curious whether those are is a priority area or not, or should be from the CIO's perspective on the enterprise architecture, or can that come later? Or
well, so Jeff, some of the things you're talking about are some of the functional changes we're making here in DIT. So when I talk about an EPMO, the P to me means program.
Yeah.
Right. And then project and portfolio falls in underneath of that. We are going to focus in on an enterprise architecture program because enterprise architecture, portfolio management program, that it's the continuous cycle. They feed each other. And I don't think we have that in place today, to your point. I think it's broken. We need to get that reconnected so we can start reaping the benefits of what that cycle looks like for us across the state. When you talk about data management, it's the fourth bullet there in the last thing. We have bits and pieces of it, and our data analytics center does a lot of things, but I'm not sure yet that across the enterprise that we actually have a true data management, data governance program. And so we really want to start honing in on how do we start using our data better and getting to those different outcomes. I know Dr. Cohen in DHHS, she's really focused on how do I give the governor and show the governor that we're in a healthier North Carolina. And it's starting to pull in all these different disparate data sets, similar to what we did with COVID safe and the problems that exist because of all the legacy baggage that we continue to bring forward because we feel the need to, as opposed to maybe at some point in time, it's time to just jettison that stuff. And from this point forward, this is what we're doing. Now, I know there's state laws and open records and some of those things that might prohibit us from doing it. So, but we need to sit down and have those conversations and not just assume that that's what we have to continue to do. And then the last thing, I talked about the 31-page DIT plan. You can't see this really, but this is what it's been synthesized down to. This is 31 pages down to this as well. And you're going to see the DIT plan is a supporting function of the enterprise plan. So everything we're doing in DIT somehow is tying back into that enterprise strategic plan. It's not going off and doing something out in left field when we have no business being in left field.
And I guess the comment on the data management is, as we're implementing the strategic plan, and particularly on our side with cybersecurity and what Rob's got responsibility for, there's obviously, and CIOs will know this, there's the file management and storage approaches to that, solutions like Panzura and stuff that obviously are techniques for that, particularly in the cloud, but more importantly, they provide a pretty significant level of cybersecurity protection for the organization. And how we get a common solution across departments, I think is going to be fundamentally important to get people to buy into doing that.
Yeah. And Jeff, I was just going to weigh in on your comment about data and defining it. We did have a couple of places in our document at the detail of the 0 to 18-month activities where we talked about places where we might start doing that data analysis. Where does data live? Where does it flow? And the bigger picture, I think, the more the state can get to that through incremental and what seem like, fast approaches, even if it's just for an area, I think the better. I agree with you, having that holistic plan is great, but I also recognize and acknowledge for organizations, sometimes we can get more focused on delivering the full plan and find that that has become our strategy and our goal. And perhaps it's got to be tempered with and balanced with incremental progress in both areas, right? So define some of the data management and then implement some solutions so people see success. Now define some more, implement some more.
Yeah, so across the data management, when I think about the work that GDAC is focused on, there's a lot of obviously work across the healthcare between HIE and some of the things that DHHS is working on, and then also across the criminal justice community as well. But those are only, I mean, that's not everything that's going on across the state, right? And so there's a lot of opportunities there, but I think we are, to your point, Tracy, incrementally, I would suspect that we do have data management classifications in place within the DHHS world and within the criminal justice world. I'm not sure that we're there across all the different levels of government or across all the agencies of government yet to that point. And it would have to be, you have to eat, I hate to use this term, eat the elephant one bite at a time. You can't eat it in one shot. Or you're going to just get so focused on that you'll never get anything done. Yeah. Okay, Keith, you have your hand up, sir.
Yes, I think one of the places I'd encourage you to take a look is what's happening in the commercial sector around marketing systems. So if we think about the goal here of servicing the citizens where they're at and with what they need and what they want, that is essentially where digital transformation has taken marketing systems. And the marketing systems now help you identify what they want, direct market in the omni-channel, so deliver the message where they're at, and they oftentimes help you take advantage of the issues around privacy. So if somebody wants to be removed, they can identify and be removed if they don't want to be communicated in a certain channel. So most of the commercial marketing systems now are handling many of these issues when we talk about digital transformation and being able to service a citizen individually in any channel they want to be serviced.
Yeah, and I know in the prior state, local government really did a great job of that omni-channel approach. And the question really was, how does the state tap into what local governments already have established? I don't know if our local governments are to that level of interaction yet at the local level with residents of cities, municipalities, or within the county itself. Okay, thank you, Keith. Anybody else? I think all our hands are down. So appreciate all the feedback. Thank you so much. And again, as we look at that strategic plan as probably a later opportunity for our ITSB to come together and focus on is really how do we start looking at the prioritization and the evaluation of projected or prospective projects as it starts feeding into the budget cycle, so we can start maybe giving some stuff to OSBM ahead of time as opposed to reacting to what agencies have submitted and seeing something show up in a budget. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff and let you take it away from a cybersecurity aspect. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jim. Yes, Julie, if we go to the first slide, much like Tracy and the group on the other side of the fence, our group is comprised, obviously formally, of folks that are part of the oversight board. But I think what's significant is the breadth of support that we get through the staff in DIT around this topic. And more importantly is to recognize we have most of the CISOs from the largest agencies, from county representation as well. We have representation from the National Guard. So it is an unbelievably talented and deep knowledge set of people that are participating on this. I guess the first comment I'm going to make around the people, and this is just kind of an observation of being, a citizen of the state of North Carolina and how a lot of people look at government oftentimes, particularly government employees or state employees. It's people that are just putting in their time. They've got a certain level of skill set. They put in 8 hours a day. They go home, they draw their 30-year pension, they get their free health care for life, and we thank you for your service. That scenario could not be farther from the truth. And I think it's epitomized completely by the staff at DIT as an example. I mean, these are people with deep, deep subject matter expertise. These are people who have a desire to serve the state. You feel it, you sense it, and you see it in their day-to-day actions. These guys aren't punching time clocks. These are people involved and committed to providing solutions and protecting our personal data and information. So for that, I tip my hat to everybody in DIT, and particularly the people that are working in the cybersecurity area, because it is such a critically important area, as we all know, with the advent of things. So I just up front wanted to say thank you to everyone, as well as all the committee members who are spending time. As a group right now, we're meeting monthly. We keep it short meetings, trying to get our hands and grasp around scoping this and narrowing the scope of things we can accomplish or believe we can contribute, which is one of the missions or charges from the legislative creation of this body, is not just as an oversight, but to help guide and provide direction. We see that in the digital transformation. Again, I tip my hat to you guys. That's spectacular stuff you've created. The strategic plan. There's a lot of forward movement that we haven't seen for quite a while. So, Jim, that's all under your direction. And again, I tip my hat to you. Next slide. Julie, appreciate it. This is really where and this is going to be kind of high level information. There's a lot of deep diving, a lot of notes and content around this. For us, there's really three priorities and that come out of this, and we'll see those in a little bit in another slide, but I just want to articulate it up front, is that we're focused, at least this group has said, we want to focus on how do we educate and provide a pathway, if you will, for cybersecurity careers. We know that's absolutely critically important. We've got hundreds of thousands of open positions across the state, whether that be public or private enterprises, as well as we know across the nation, any given time, there's over a need for 2 million cybersecurity slots for information. So we need to be proactive in how we help address that void or need. Second thing, which was really important, is more down to the day-to-day level, which is how do we create an environment that's resilient? And resilient being, as I would define it, or I've heard others define it actually, is we know we're going to have some kind of data breach incident. And then how well do we recover from that? And how quickly are we able to get back to normal state of conducting business? That is a resilient environment that Rob and his team is doing marvelous things around, and we need to continue to focus. With that, it really is the umbrella concept that Rob has brought to the table of how do we create a whole of state approach, which is something a little bit of an industry standard term now, but it has massive repercussions on how we implement and follow that to ensure that. So by the whole state, which is one of the reasons the composition of this work group, this committee, is so broad, is because we recognize within the state level and servicing the agencies and citizens, we actually have external groups that interact with us, and the cyber protection, if you will, and cybersecurity protection and privacy protection is only as good as our weakest link. So for us, that we identified that there is need to focus at those levels. A lot of the issues are actually identified and identifiable, and we need to look for solutions in those areas. And we'll talk a little bit about that going forward. These are the things you see, the bullet points, without reading these to you. A lot of you are familiar because you've got technology backgrounds, but these are kind of the focus things for us as a group that we'll spend time on. Julie, next slide. So guiding principles were something we've talked a little bit about, and I've tried to quantify into a small set of points. And guiding principles are those things that we want to ensure we keep in top of mind with any solutions or efforts that go forward, and help us establish priorities to address privacy and cybersecurity. And they're things that should be relatively time-tested and true. So these things shouldn't vary over time, where individual priorities, goals, programs, those things will change. But there's no magic. We all get data is the goal that we have to take care of. That is why people are hacking and breaching. We recognize, I think, by most of the studies, there are a few data breach incidents that are just people being pains in the fanny and just trying to disrupt and aggravate. But vast majority is all about somebody wanting to get paid to reverse the actions they've taken against us, which puts us in this next point, which we have the 4 attributes. As you look at solutions, kind of a Gardner magic quadrant, that if you look at these, we have to have a minimum level of sufficiency at these levels. But more importantly, there's some that we're going to have deep content expertise around, and tool sets and automation and further automation in these areas. And actually a shift from being absolutely defensive minded to how do we take a offensive position going forward. I think fundamentally the third point addresses the concept that we could spend bajillions of dollars and nobody's going to be 100% protected. So it's finding that balance point between what does the spend need to do to allow us to operate in an appropriate level of risk, and then what are the procedures, programs, tools we do to manage that risk, and then either mitigate or eliminate risk to the degree we're capable of. As we talked about a minute ago, I think we're trying to be somewhat pragmatic and thoughtful in that, recognizing there's a list of 50 items we could focus on and need to do, and there's things the department, Rob and his team is doing. But as a committee, and to an extent the department, they have actually identified areas where we need to work on, and we're going to talk about one of those in a little bit here. At the county level, is let's get some wins. Let's start building a solid foundation on the things we know we can do. The other one, which is classic governmental issue that we always sometimes run into, and because the departments run somewhat autonomously with all the CIOs reporting to their department heads, and there's kind of a dotted line back to Jim's role as the state CIO, is that we've got to eliminate duplicative efforts where we're spending money, and we may be not just get efficiencies in spend, but efficiencies and, more importantly, in outcomes. So that has got a little bit of our attention. Next slide. So these are the things that kind of as a body we have been focused on and we're going to focus on going forward. The whole workforce pathways from internships, and we're thinking about how do we bring that back into not just at a university level and programs that Montreat and NC State and others are starting to do around cybersecurity, but how do we bring it back into high schools level, and then how do we bring it forward? And then there's the whole, as we see with Google and others, the certificates. How do we educate people and bring them in? I mean, we kind of tease, we talk internally in some of the businesses I work around now, if you have a really, really complex technical issue and problem to solve, you need to have 14-year-olds on your team because they're the ones that can solve it. And so what we need to do is, again, how do we create career paths for all the open and demand this area? Because cybersecurity is not going away. I think we all agree with that and understand it. For us, because we are mandated legislatively as a body, and obviously, even though there are some service and fee structures around certain departments around IT, it's still predominantly general funds, state general funds usage. And so we are going to have to be advocates for legislative funding. We know, and Lee and her team is working very closely with members of both chambers and bodies, but we need to get targeted and focused, because as those that have worked around the legislature, there's a difference between getting a one-time project fund and getting recurring monies. We need to be able to understand the nuances of those, and we need to look at the programs, particularly that can have, quote, one-time funding, and prioritize those projects to help accelerate and get those things at the forefront. Cybersecurity, which some of you may or not be aware of, when you go looking in the state budget and you're trying to find, okay, how much should we get for cybersecurity and all the nuances across departments, you're not going to actually find it. Because one of the things that has been done, at least historically, is we bury it in other nondescript line items. and for the sole purpose is to not allow outside entities and bad actors to have a sense of the scale and scope of funding that we're doing in cybersecurity. So it'll appear under innocuous names that you would never have a clue that that's actual cybersecurity funding. But so that's an area. Cyber maturity, that's something to the extent maybe when we get done, Rob, you can talk to a little bit more and differently. But that is a fundamental guiding principle, how the department operates. And then we will need to spend our times, efforts, and attentions to look at building blocks that advance us in that journey of bringing and ensuring cybersecurity is a mature solution set in us.
There's Jeff, if you wanted me to, you want me to go ahead and jump in here and just give everybody
perfect. Thank you.
All right, great. So we recognize that due to a number of different factors, whether it be the original funding source of a technology or a platform or a capability, we have some incongruencies with our cybersecurity stack. And those incongruencies don't necessarily identify gaps, but we do have overlap of capabilities to an extent for platforms and tools. And we also do have gaps that are not revealing or opening the state up to additional risk, but it's a capability that could be filled in not only just for state agencies' benefit, but also to extend that capability out to local governments. So we're going to be going through a cyber maturity assessment exercise that will identify from a broad view the capabilities we currently have, how they overlap, where the gaps exist, and how we can move forward in a whole state approach to be able to extend those services to local governments. So the goal here with this maturity assessment is to create processes that are both standard and repeatable, align cyber strategies to strategic business plans, and also gain insight into the state's cybersecurity maturity as a whole. Hope that helped add value, Jeff.
Yeah, and if you could elaborate on two further things that help in this area is, can you talk a little bit about the continuing professional education and that we're sending you and staff to stay on top of this and share ideas and from other entities and state bodies, and the exercises that we participate as a state and your group does on statewide exercises around practicing and preparing for breaches and et cetera a little bit?
Sure. We're in the regular habit of offering tabletop exercises from the DIT perspective. Some recent examples are compromised accounts and Microsoft 365 led efforts on data privacy. There's also the Secure the Vote tabletop exercises that we regularly participate in, as well as emergency management led exercises. From a continuous education perspective, onboarding a resource is challenging enough given the amount of opportunities that exist and the shallow pool from which we are filling those particular opportunities. So we can't continue to look at onboarding an employee as a destination. Cyber actors are always ahead of the game, and technology and defense postures and measures are struggling, frankly, to keep up with the advancements that cyber actors have made in variation of their ransomware, of attack methods, and the whole ball of wax. So we constantly are looking for opportunities to expose cyber professionals, both at the state level and in the across the whole entire Joint Cybersecurity Task Force, in emerging technologies, emerging education opportunities, and bringing everybody into the fold. But it starts with trust and relationships. This is something that was alluded to earlier, that we cannot force a platform or a service onto a local government. We have to come alongside through the relationships that we build with the Joint Cybersecurity Task Force and the demonstrated expertise in assisting counties. We have to come alongside counties that may be hesitant to participate, share threat intelligence, report significant cybersecurity incidents, demonstrate our capability and our openness and support of their particular needs in their local governments.
Great, thanks, Rob. Next couple things, just to touch on them briefly, is we talked about redundancy and duplication of efforts, and the DIT, Department of Public Instruction, has cybersecurity pilots that have been authorized, they've been funded. It's like 27.5 million, I believe. With the lion's share, actually, the larger project, maybe obviously or not, is with DIT, is about 25 million of that. But those are the kinds of things where we can help. Go back to the legislatures, or coordination through Jim and DIT, is to recognize that they need to kind of own and control this, and we need to not. And that starts with how we write statements of work, or the charges put to those departments, that there is some kind of coordination across, which obviously when you're a big old organization like the state of North Carolina, that's very hard to do. One of the things, which is a very specific action, is to talk about the exempt status of selected positions. Some of you may or may not be aware, those that work within the state. There's rules on pay scales and tiers based on years of service, on skill sets owned, and that has traditionally, it's really looked at as how do I hire and retain across other departments in the states, other states hiring people away, and those types of things, which tend to be viewed. But I think all of us on this call recognize competition for cybersecurity talent is not just a governmental body issue. I mean, it's all the public or private organizations and businesses that we're competing with, Google and Apple and Microsoft and Bank of America and Wells Fargo and the universities, for that talent. And for us to have the flexibility to recruit, retain, hire, move people, move across assignments and projects, as Jim was alluding to an issue with that earlier, we have the ability, if we build the business case almost on a session by session basis, to create and get positions within DIT, particularly in the cybersecurity area, where I believe we can get exempt status. We've done it in the past as a legislature, and I think with the right, again, business case, we can do that going forward, which will give Jim, you the flexibility, and Rob to run the department as most efficiently as you deem appropriate. So that's one big area. The other one, when we talked about the weakest link, and Rob, I'm going to ask you to talk about this a little bit, but one of the areas, as a lot of you know, whether it's DOR, whether it's DHHS, we've got a lot of interaction on a daily basis of data and information and access to systems being moved between the counties, predominantly, a little lesser extent municipalities, back to the state. So our ability to protect our environments from a cybersecurity area are only as good as that environment with those accessing and coming in through our front door. You know, I believe this is a ballpark figure, maybe 30% of the 100 counties have actual strong cyber protections and firewalls in place, but we've got, you know, almost 3/4 of all the counties, and a lot of smaller counties have almost nothing, and primarily because they don't have the funding or size to be able to do that. So those are issues we're going to have to pay attention to, and in a sense, it may be a necessity that the state steps up to help provide solutions guidance. And that's something we need to address sooner rather than later. Rob, anything you would want to add to that?
Sure. So we have, and you hit the nail on the head with the percentage, but more specifically, over 30% of our North Carolina counties now have intrusion prevention capabilities as funded through DIT and in furtherance of our whole state approach. Randy Kress, are you on here? I'd like to get your insight from a county perspective or from a local government perspective on, no, I do not see him on, unfortunately. So we have a significant amount of opportunity to, continue that outreach, as I've said in my earlier remarks. One thing that we do on the proactive side is go out to the local governments and perform cybersecurity assessments, and the county is presented with that assessment. Our challenge is that these assessments are completed, and in a fair amount of cases, those are looked at as a destination. Check, we've accomplished the assessment. We're going to put that on the shelf. We'll see you guys later. And what ends up happening, the recommendations that are made out of that assessment, and specifically for no cost or low cost remediative steps, are not taken into account or are not affected to close a identified gap.
Yeah, and I guess this is probably a bad analogy that somebody will kick me under the table, but the intrusion prevention services, there's a standard set of tools and things. They're somewhat pricey. There's things that the state has that determine these are the standards that need to be implemented. And we may need to look at some kind of policies or procedures that create kind of that mandated vaccine environment where you're going to communicate with the state. You're going to have certain minimum standards and processes and automation in place. Otherwise, you expose everyone in a greater degree. So those are things from even creating policy or taking policy recommendations back to the legislature. This entire body, not just the Cybersecurity Committee, is going to have to wrap our heads around and get comfortable with what we would suggest and advocate for. So that's coming to everybody's table soon. Last slide, I believe, Julie, is these are the things just to give you a sense of what we're talking about within our committee. And then again, trying to reel it back in and stay focused on the things we can get done. We've tasked, which Rob is going to own, creating a work group around the career pathways focus. I think that, you know, gets very close to the top of our list of things we need to do. We recognize there's programs that are different between on the, which we've talked about, on the breadth of capability and funding that will vary between the, you know, the 3-tier level county structure that we have in the state. We know there's certain legislation and funding that's already pending. This will be paramount on this body again going forward, things that either impact digital transformation and or cybersecurity, and potentially even organizational structures that it will influence the ability for the strategic vision and direction of the state under Jim's direction to have a modicum of success going forward is going to need buy-in at the various levels and department heads, and that's going to be tantamount to being our mission and guidance, I think. I see things against the whole, as which I love the digital transformation. It impacts cybersecurity and the ability to protect and serve, to steal an acronym from our public safety people, but common tools and platforms. We got to get away from the one-offs. We got to get away from buying code and then modifying it to the nth degree. When we put in NC Tracks and acquired that system from the state of New York, it was purchased under the auspices that it's an 80% functional fit and there'd be 20% or less modifications. And 6 or 7 years later, it's a complete reversal. And it's a basically custom system through and through. So to support it, enhance it, we have no ability to leverage all the work of the other states that use that same platform. We got to stop doing that. And then the same thing is, again, access to state contracts. We just got to get smarter, particularly for cybersecurity, to optimize the spend, because it's going to be such a significant thing going forward, is that we've got to consolidate and create a central point of contact for doing state contracts for cybersecurity. People can't go doing that independently. But the balance of that, which is always from an end user's perspective, it can't be we're here at the highest level of governmental body, and then it's going to burden and add time frame to being able to access, acquire, implement cybersecurity solutions. It's got to be easy, convenient, and not create an undue burden on the ultimate end user. And then obviously some of the pieces is just, it's hard to read here. You might be able to blow it up, things we can get, but doing background research on where is cybersecurity going. So much like Tracy, what you and your group have looked at, we got immediate needs, which we talked about. We know some of the problem areas that need immediate fix, but we've got for the solution, we need 10, 15 years from now, not how we're addressing cyber issues just today. So it's like you said, I love the analogy, it's skate to the puck. And so what made Wayne Gretzky so great? It wasn't that he could skate to the puck and knew where the puck was anticipated to go. He could anticipate 3 passes where the puck was going to be passed 3 times before he needed to be on the 3rd pass. And we need to be that advanced in our thinking and vision in cybersecurity. So this group has been amazing. It's down, maybe perceived in the weeds, but we're still at a committee level. Deep talent of all the people. Appreciate the time and effort. If you want to get your nerd on, we are definitely a body that would welcome anybody being on both groups. And it's amazing conversation, and you will learn a pile. So again, I want to thank everybody for the time commitment they're doing with our body, and it's fascinating stuff. And lastly, Julie again's been just marvelous. They've been helping prep stuff beforehand. Rob, we are in such amazingly good hands. I'm excited about working with you, continuing to work with you. I think our members are, and we're looking for great things to continue to be done by your group. So thanks everyone for kind of bearing with us going through all this material.
Thank you for that, Jeff.
Okay. Hey, just one quick question. I'm sure this was discussed, but depth in defense. I didn't see that concept anywhere in there listed. I know that might have to go with the part about developing bench strength, but we really need to start developing depth in defense as well. And so was that discussed at the committee level?
Not in detail, and there's a lot of concepts around kind of the life cycle of cybersecurity, right? That we need to get into.
Right, and that's actually captured within the cyber maturity aspect of our strategic objectives.
Okay, I'll just make our ITSB aware of the fact that we are in the process right now of working on a cyber roadmap for the next 3 to 5 years to present over to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee in the November timeframe to outline here's where we would like to go from a cyber component as a state. So if you think you have any input that you want to provide, I would encourage you to contact Rob and make him aware of your thoughts and considerations. Keith, you got your hand up, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Good job. Thank you, Jeff and Rob. Not that I think that it's part of this particular committee, but Jim, for your role and kind of responsibilities at the state level, one of the things that's interesting that I find within my particular agency is that my divisions or my business lines, whatever you want to call them, have no real concept of their own risk assessment, and that is in the event of an outage, in the event of a cyber attack and specific downtime, how do they represent themselves in their ability to understand at what point does that outage represent a serious risk in the responsibilities of delivering services to the citizens of the state, right? Or to the businesses of the state. Mm-hmm. So as part of any kind of cybersecurity protection, cost assessment, recovery, all that stuff, the underlying agencies need to have a realistic perspective of what the risk is in their line of business being out and how long they can be out for. I think that's absent from my agency. I don't know if it's absent across the board, but that's something that we should think about.
Yeah, and Keith, if you go back to the conversation we had with the strategic plan, when I talk about that application portfolio, and again, go back to we have to start talking about business risk and talk to business leadership about risk. For that very reason, we tend to go talk IT to IT. So we talk across at each other, but we never really talk up to the business leadership so they have an understanding of the risk in terms of terminology that they understand and comprehend. They don't get bits and bytes, but to your point, walking them through, we used to, as an example, in Pennsylvania, we would go through a continuity exercise where, as an example, we just threw out there's a DDoS attack. Well, of course, most of them didn't know what a DDoS attack was, but, and the first thing they're like, oh, well, we'll email everybody, let them know what the status is. Well, no, you're not understanding what the DDoS is doing, right? You just lost all digital communication.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden there's this look like, well, we have all our material online. Again, nobody's getting, nothing's getting out.
Yeah.
And as they started, like, you could see their eyeballs getting a little bit wider, and they started to understand. So you mean we might actually have to call people? That might be a course of action you have to take. And so they started thinking about it a little bit differently. I don't know how much of that type of at an agency level or even across at an enterprise level. I know when we were in the state of Washington, we actually did some election security exercises, because, and again, similar to the council of states, there were separately electeds as well, but our Secretary of State, what if she had protesters show up at her house? What would be that, it's just going through and doing those tabletop exercises of what are the appropriate courses of action and what would law enforcement do? Would that be done at a state level? Would that be done at the local level? And I know that doesn't necessarily correlate to cyber specifically, but it's just getting through those thought processes of here's the scenario. How would you respond? What are our options? What would be the best course of action to select from? And so you start getting that muscle memory in place. So when the actual thing does occur, because let's be honest, cyber incidents are going to occur. It's not if, it's when. And we've had a history here in North Carolina, 30 plus since 2017, and they still continue to occur. We have that muscle memory, so we know what to do immediately, and we're not sitting there for a day on, geez, what should we do next? There's a ton of attack. We got trained resources. We really didn't talk a lot about our National Guard team that as an augment force to us and helping us deliver critical services out at the local government level and doing the great work they're doing. We're trying to do that across our 911 community as an example. So our 911 board has funded cyber assessments for the connection points of going on to the next gen 911 network. And nothing is more frustrating, and Rob kind of talked about it, that we go out there, we do these assessments, and what I don't want is the show end up being in a filing cabinet somewhere, because we have examples of this calendar year alone where somebody has done something like that to turn around and get victimized by exactly the vulnerabilities that were identified in the assessment. So, Keith, great point. I would, and if I can help you out in any way within DOI, I would be more than happy to. I'm sure Rob would be as well, to help orchestrate a tabletop exercise and start trying to get folks to think a little bit differently. But you're spot on. Yeah, there's others who put their hand up too. But go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, and at the strategic level, I mean, the tabletop concept is a fantastic idea. Let's pull it out at the strategic level for a moment. So individual agencies have their own incident response plans. And the state as a whole has a cyber incident response plan as well, which was recently reviewed and incorporated into emergency management's overarching plan. What I would like to offer to you, Keith, and I'll broaden this out to a representation of Council of State and Cabinet, is your involvement specifically with the next review, so we can gain valuable insight from your perspective on how to best position the state as a whole to respond to cybersecurity incidents and not just have an agency-specific way. I think that conversation would obviously involve communication pathways, a RACI diagram where we can help sketch that out with you, POAM development. So I am excited about offering that to you as a Council of State CIO. Definitely interested in seeing this forward.
Yeah, we're in for it. And you guys have always been collaborative with us anyway, but I look forward to that opportunity.
Okay. I'm not sure who was next, Tracy or Keith, but I'll let you guys fight it out. Who wants to go first? Well, they're both on mute, so I spend another $10 in the IT jar. Yeah, I'm going to pretty much fund my agency funding here.
I'll just offer a data point for Jeff in case your committee finds it useful. SAS actually with the country office was pretty much like a franchise model. So it looked like local municipalities. They all had their own infrastructure. We were like Swiss cheese. So part of our transformation was to change where all the endpoints were funded and managed by the central IT. That's how we closed that gap, and it did require a change in funding model and a change in perspective. But in the era of cybersecurity, the best approach was for us to actually take control of all the endpoints, all the network capability through every country office throughout the world.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, Keith. I just, again, to me, it's not necessarily about control. I think more importantly, we need visibility, and then we need accountability at the state level. So we do have some agencies that do a phenomenal job at activities, and it's not about, what I don't want this to appear as is we're swooping in, we're going to take over all this stuff because we're going to implode as well. But what we really need is that visibility as to what's going on. And as we see things, that there's accountability back to our state CISO's organization, that things are being acted upon at a very timely moment, so we can make sure that our big enterprise is being secured. So it's kind of the thought process here.
Yeah.
I wish I was corporate America and I could sit there and say I could do it all, but I know I can't today.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to help you understand that, one, we went through that transformation, and two, once we changed the funding model where we were providing, they were more than happy to have us take on that particular pain point. So it actually facilitated and accelerated all of the enterprises and their ability to actually execute as a country office, even independently from a business function.
Yeah, and I would like to do something similar as we talk about our funding model challenges, is really fund us at the enterprise to do cybersecurity. And let us do it once and let us maximize the return on investment of that taxpayer dollar. Tracy?
Yeah, I was just going to chime in and add the importance of what was said earlier by Rob, the business plus the technical assessments toward risk. I also I always remind people when we say the words risk assessment that that sometimes there is acceptance of risk. So there are times when we can get so focused on mitigating all the risk that we can perhaps overspend, right, in some areas relative to funds that should go to others. And toward that, then this last point that Keith was helping to share, right, this need for us to be able to create the structure that lets us do this at the state level and minimize the reasons or the hurdles that people might not want to participate. So that idea of a sort of centrally supported, right, common function really wins out here, because now the agencies don't have a reason to avoid getting the security because it comes at the cost of their other services. But then again, back to the balance of sometimes there are places where the risk needs to be accepted in order to put the resources where they're most necessary. So it'll be a really tough balancing act, Jim, but between you, Rob, and others, and in combination with the agencies, right, and their business leadership, that'll be the key to getting there.
No, and I wholeheartedly agree with you on that. What I have to be careful about, and again, I had one particular agency said, well, we evaluated all the risks and we accept them. And my comment is, well, show me where your risk assessment was, because if there's any enterprise risks, you do not have the authority to accept enterprise risk. That's my responsibility. If it's an agency risk, by all means, I wholeheartedly agree and will endorse that. So it was kind of a confrontational moment there for a little bit until we actually got to work through and actually what are the risks that were identified and at what level did that risk exist at, and ultimately we got to the point where we could accept the risks.
Yeah, so, yeah. Another point, Jim, too. I think we have to educate agencies in a way that identifies the risk management and reduction, whereas the risk elimination will never be possible.
Yeah.
So we have to reduce risk to an acceptable level and a manageable level, with all things considered, compensating controls and other factors. I think that's the message that needs to be communicated, and that would keep agencies from perhaps wanting to use their risk acceptance authority or their perceived risk acceptance authority.
Yeah, and Rob, as you know, as we speak, I always talk about mitigation first before I talk about remediation, because for that reason. Anything else here before we move on and say thank you to Jeff and team for all their great work here? Okay. Okay. And we thought we would be done early, and we still got 2 more to go. So without further ado, actually we got 3 more to go. So Nate, yeah, I see you're on camera here, so we'll transition to you for a quick legislative update, and then our favorite topic around broadband. So go ahead, Nate.
Thank you, Jim. I appreciate it. Can everybody hear me all right? I'm off mute. Cool.
No $10 for
once. Yeah, so I've got just 2 quick back-to-back presentations I want to share. I'm Nate Denny. I'm the Deputy Secretary for Broadband and Digital Equity here at DIT, and until recently was the agency's Chief of Staff and Legislative Liaison. Still doing legislative work on the broadband bucket specifically, but have otherwise shifted away from our legislative portfolio to focus more exclusively on broadband. So I wanted to just quickly run you through what DIT's top line legislative priorities were for this session and where everything stacks up. Priority number 1 after a significant amount of time with interim leadership was get Jim Weaver Senate confirmed, and so we got that done as of June 1. So I was very pleased to finally have that notch in the belt. The other priorities are all things that have been, well, are mostly things that have been discussed here in Senator Tartt's and other presentations. We knew that we wanted to stabilize DIT funding and generate larger recurring investment in cybersecurity. As Jim mentioned, we want to shift cybersecurity expenses to the enterprise and out of the rates model. We knew we wanted to attack the digital divide, and we'll talk a lot more about that shortly. We wanted to remove the incentive for bad actors to attack state and local government entities by restricting the ability or limiting the ability of those entities to pay ransom. And I should note here, I flagged a bill, House Bill 813. That is not an agency bill, but it is one that we have supported, and we think will achieve that goal for the state. And then last but certainly not least, we wanted to provide more time for eligible or required healthcare providers that must connect to NC Health Connects by June 2021, lest they start having claims rejected. There's an existing statutory requirement that a significant swath of North Carolina's healthcare providers tie into the Health Information Exchange if they accept Medicaid or state health plan. And we have made tremendous progress on onboarding large healthcare providers and hospitals across the state. There's still a number of small providers or kind of niche providers that either for lack of internet access or other resources, have not gotten there yet. And our top priority, and this is one we shared with the state health plan and with the Department of Health and Human Services, was to make sure that no patients were harmed because of this requirement. That we got in Session Law 2021-26, pushing that deadline out to January 23, and most importantly, having us work with State Health Plan and DHHS to come up with recommendations to protect those patients while trying to achieve that real-time record sharing that is the General Assembly's vision here. Can we move on to the next slide, please? The other, I let you know where the Health Information Exchange bill was. The House Bill 813 that I referenced on ransomware has passed the House and is with Senate rules now. Everything else is tied up in the budget. So I wanted to quickly kind of run through a snapshot of where DIT stands there. As Jim mentioned, broadband is our #1 priority as an agency. The governor proposed a $1.2 billion plan to close the digital divide permanently in North Carolina. The Senate budget included $750 million for achieving that goal. The House budget has about $1.016 billion in it for the same goal. So we're closely watching the conference process to see where we end up. On the cybersecurity front, the Senate included $5 million non-recurring each year of the biennium for cybersecurity projects. The House did $10 million recurring. So we are hopeful that we'll end up on the higher side of that scale and anticipate some sort of compromise there. I believe Jim mentioned earlier the House budget also includes kind of a cybersecurity spend plan. It's a roadmap project for us to show how we're going to use this increased investment in cybersecurity functions across the state too. So that is the transparency around our planning for those funds are, I think, a necessary step to justify the kind of investment we're talking about. In the 2020-21 biennium, 1920 biennium, the General Assembly took about $20 million out of the IT fund to pay for teacher pay and for the cyber pilot that was mentioned in Senator Tartt's presentation, and the Carolina Cyber Center, which also came up in that presentation. One of our highest budget priorities this year was making that IT fund whole and educating legislators about the potential risks to our program if that's used as a source of funding moving forward. I think those efforts have worked. Both House and Senate budget include a $20 million one-time repayment to that fund that I think is critical for the department. I should note that the House budget and Senate budget also approve our rate submission, which has been a casualty of not having a comprehensive state budget over the last few years, and then also includes recurring funding for several other key programs, including Health Connects, CJ Leads, and the Educational Longitudinal Data System, all kind of based out of our GDAC, our Government Data Analytics Center. So that's kind of where we stand right now. We are closely watching the conference process and are very optimistic about the shared commitment between the governor, Senate leadership, and House leadership on investment in state technology needs and broadband especially. And so I'm happy to take any questions on that before we do a deeper dive on the broadband element of our mission. Or I can jump right in.
Why don't you just roll right in there, Nate?
Excellent, will do. Still me talking about broadband now. The governor has been very committed, as has the General Assembly, to addressing the digital divide in North Carolina for a number of years. But a primary challenge has been the lack of capital to make the investments we need to fully connect our state. I think COVID has really revealed to everyone who maybe wasn't paying attention before just how critical closing the digital divide is for full participation in the modern economy. You know, certainly in my household with my wife and I both trying to work from home often, our kids are young, so we don't have kids, participating in elementary or middle school from home, but many families did. Telemedicine access, certainly the ability to apply for jobs, because this hasn't just been a public health crisis, it's been an economic crisis. These are all really driving home the urgency of addressing this kind of once in a lifetime challenge we've got in terms of needs on digital equity. And fortunately, we have a real once in a lifetime opportunity to address these needs using some of the funds coming down from the federal government. So the governor's proposed a comprehensive approach to achieve full digital equity in North Carolina. And so you can see kind of how it ties back to the earlier conversation about digital transformation. I think it's important to share the definition of digital equity, and that's the state in which all individuals and communities in North Carolina have access, the ability to afford, and the tools and skills necessary to fully participate in the digital economy and in their democracy, right? So making sure that our residents have what they need to access government services or health care services, so on and so forth. That really comes down to several key problems that are the main pillars of the governor's proposal. One, infrastructure investment. Of the 1.1 million North Carolinians who don't have high-speed internet in their home, about 270,000 of them don't even have access, right? So they couldn't subscribe to the high enough speeds to fully participate in the economy if they wanted to, if they could afford it. About 1.3 million North Carolinian households have to pay more than 2% of their annual income just to afford the average monthly cost of a high-speed internet connection. So affordability is key to addressing this challenge. And then digital literacy. A huge number of North Carolinians don't have a home laptop or desktop computer. They don't even have a smartphone. Many of them don't have the skills they need to access the kinds of services that we're talking about. So to really achieve digital equity, it's not enough to just run a fiber line by your house, right? We have to address your ability to afford it, the skills you have, and the devices you have. And that's really the crux of the governor's proposal. Can we move to the next slide, please? The key to this proposal is setting very aggressive targets. North Carolina will be a top 5 state for internet adoption by 2025 if we address affordability for all households, especially those with school children in them. If we make smart investments, recognizing that not everybody's starting from the same place, right? North Carolina's been in a good position in terms of recovering from this, the economic crisis associated with COVID, but not everybody's recovering at the same rate, right? Minority households are feeling the pain and feeling the gap economically more than others, and this is true in connectivity as well. And then again, any effort here has to involve dealing with the devices and the training and tools that our residents need. Specifically, if we can go to the next slide, please, we've got these goals. We want 98% of North Carolinians to have access to high-speed internet. And when I say high speed, we need a clarification here because the FCC defines broadband rather, as an internet connection of 25 megabits per second download and 3 megabits per second upload speeds. That's not sufficient anymore. So we want to make investments consistent with federal government requirements for use of stimulus funds to get higher speeds, a minimum of 100 megabits per second down, 20 megabits per second up. But we need to be building for the future too. We need 100 megabits per second symmetrical for our residents, businesses, healthcare providers, and so on to fully embrace the power of connectivity. Setting aside infrastructure access, we have very specific adoption or subscription rate targets. We want 80% of North Carolina households subscribe to high-speed internet by 2025. Within that, it's important, and it goes back to that digital equity notion. It's not enough to have an 80% statewide average, right? White households in North Carolina subscribe at about a 76% rate. We know that Black, Latino, and Native American households lag considerably behind. So we're going to have to put in the proactive work within those communities to address affordability and generate higher subscription rates. And perhaps most importantly, we want 100% of households with school children in them to subscribe to high-speed internet. We want to permanently close what's known as the homework gap, right? More and more education assignments are being done online, being assigned online in the absence of traditional textbooks. If someone's getting those assignments but don't have the connection or the device at home, then they're never going to keep up. So those are our 2025 targets. The spending outlined by the governor is on the next slide, if we can move forward. And it's a $1.2 billion investment, largely from the American Rescue Plan, about half of which is infrastructure investment, and the other half addresses with affordability and digital literacy. $600 million over 3 distinct programs. One is the state's existing GREAT grant program. We call it GREAT 2.0 because we believe there are a number of policy changes that need to happen to make that program effective for all North Carolinians. It started out limited to just Tier 1 economically distressed counties. We know that won't cut it, right? Even Tier 3 counties have large chunks of rural census tracts that are or underserved. We need to shorten the application process and the protest process that internet providers use to take pot shots at other providers' grant applications and get them ruled out. We know that we need to invest in higher speeds, both as a part of this plan and its targets, and to comply with federal Treasury guidelines for speed thresholds and technology preferences. So, like I said, we call it GREAT Grant 2.0, but the biggest chunk of this infrastructure investment is through that existing state program, $350 million. We also need more agile tools. We need more flexible strategic tools. And so we propose $150 million for a competitive bidding process by which we will work directly with counties to put out RFPs, and where we hope the market can respond more efficiently than what is a very prescriptive GREAT grant process laid out in statute. And we also know that as the GREAT grants and competitive bids, because of that Treasury guidance, have to lean heavily on fiber deployment, we know that there are going to be parts of the state where fiber won't work right away or where the cost will be prohibitive in the immediate term. And so we propose $100 million for stopgap solutions, ranging from tower construction, potentially upgrades to state-owned towers that are often sought by fixed wireless companies to locate their equipment, pole replacement in support of larger broadband projects. That's a recurring theme over the General Assembly this year, especially given several providers' major commitments under the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund by the FCC. But we really have a range of proposed project approaches to address things like downtown Wi-Fi, certain tourist sites that need connectivity, right? Smaller, any project that's kind of sub-long-term fiber deployment here. That $600 million will come with an additional $900 million in either FCC Rural Digital Opportunity Fund commitments by providers in state and private sector matches for a total $1.5 billion investment in infrastructure access. And then we propose $420 million to address the affordability crisis for high-speed internet. The CARES Act created within the FCC a program called the Emergency Broadband Benefit that allows eligible low-income households, whether it's SNAP eligibility or other low-income defining criteria, to receive a $50 a month discount for their internet service. In fact, $75 a month for tribal households. And that subsidy really goes from the FCC directly to the internet, to the participating internet provider. That program received an initial $3.2 billion appropriation at the federal level, and signups are moving very quickly. North Carolina already has, as of Monday, I believe it's 202,000 households signed up for this program. So we're concerned that it'll run out quickly. And this proposal from the governor would address a $50 a month discount for 380,000 North Carolina households for 4 years to really get at that affordability challenge. And that's completely critical to hitting that 100% mark for closing the homework gap and making sure every household with school children has high-speed service. And then $165 million for digital literacy programming. This is device support and break-fix services for low-income households. It is community partnerships and programming from as small as $5,000 digital literacy planning grants that a community or a nonprofit can take advantage of to build digital equity locally, scaling up to what we call the innovative connectivity hub model. And that's having one place in a disconnected, disadvantaged area where residents can come access internet to do their homework, have a private room where they can take a telemedicine appointment, enroll in a free digital literacy training, or get a device fixed. So that's really the full scope of the governor's proposal. I should note that right now, Angie Bailey leads our broadband infrastructure office. She's the interim director there, and she's got 9 FTE that have really moved mountains to get about $15 million a year out the door over the last 4 years. So we know that we're going to have to scale up capacity to address a program of this need pretty considerably. We've also created states and nation's first Office of Digital Equity and Literacy to drive that part of the mission and make clear that we view the digital equity and literacy and affordability components as just as critical as the infrastructure challenge. Before I take questions, and I see a hand there, I'm glad to take any questions. Let me just quickly tell you where the General Assembly is on this. Both the House and Senate have signaled their commitment to using American Rescue Plan funds to addressing this need. There's a lot of agreement between both chambers and the governor on the approach outlined here. The Senate budget, I think, as I mentioned quickly in passing in the prior presentation, included $750 million for the great grants and for a similar proposal to competitive bidding called the Completing Access to Broadband program that would allow counties to match their ARPA funds with state ARPA funds and go out with an RFP to the market. The House budget includes $350 for the great grants, $400 million for that Completing Access to Broadband RFP approach, $90 million for the governor's stopgap measure proposal, another $100 million to address pole replacements in support of the state's FCC RDOF projects, and $60 million for the digital literacy initiatives that we referenced here. So all told, that $1.016 billion. But there's a lot of agreement here on this priority, and so we're hopeful that a conference agreement between the Speaker of the House, the Senate President, and the Governor will yield a tremendous investment here. So I think that's it. I see a question from Mr. Poplin.
Yes, actually, 2 points here, concerns with the legislature's willingness to spend this large amount of money for broadband infrastructure. I have concerns about 2 things. Number one, there's going to be a lot of great grant requests, and is DIT ready for that number of requests, how they're going to be able to handle that, or if they're going to be able to handle it. And number 2, with all this money coming or available at one time, we are still limited in the number of service providers that are in the state and also in inventory. I think Rocco can speak to how much inventory is costing for fiber now and all the other infrastructure that goes into play. And it looks to me like what we're going to end up doing is just bidding it off. In other words, where it would have been at a much lower price, everybody's suddenly getting a piece of the pie and wanting their broadband worked on, that it's going to keep bidding the cost up. Has the legislature really thought about that? And is DIT really ready for this glut of great grants?
Both excellent questions. Let me say first on the significant increase in demand. we are preparing for that right now. I think we've got a challenge here in that we have to build a program capable of delivering these projects prior to having an appropriation in place, right? I think one of the messages that we've shared with the General Assembly is we have to hit the ground running as quickly as possible, because we know that our neighboring states are all, without exception, planning to use ARPA funds to address broadband projects. We know that a number of them have a budget process that has already concluded, and ours has not, right? You're absolutely right about material supply chain risks. We want to build a program that has the sufficient resources, especially around grant management, to handle these needs, and we're in the process of scaling up now and addressing from a personnel side. The other thing we've got to do, because one of our top values here in implementing this plan is good stewardship of the taxpayers' resources. And so we are building a plan to incorporate risk management principles, grant integrity management on an ongoing basis, program evaluation, and compliance with federal requirements, so that we are delivering these projects in an auditable, in an accountable way, and so that we are managing the delivery of projects by grantees, by the awarded internet providers, and making sure they're delivering on their commitments to the people of North Carolina. So there is a lot of work to do. If I can quickly, on the service providers and limited inventory point, you're absolutely right. I know we're talking daily with internet providers who are planning major projects in North Carolina about their access to fiber and other materials. There's a considerable wait list now for fiber across the state, but many of our largest providers have already started working to secure and identify those resources so that they're able to move effectively. So absolutely a significant risk, but one we're seeking to manage now.
And let me, I'll add before we get to Madam Auditor there, Gerald, we know that there's 29 other states already moving forward with stuff. So the concerns you're expressing are concerns that we have as well, that we're going to be too far, are we going to end up too far back in the line, so to speak, to be able to obtain whether there are product or services that are needed to make this occur. So we share that with you. We continue to talk with manufacturers and suppliers to say, hey, especially if you're North Carolina based, we're coming, we're waiting for our budget. As soon as we get your budget, are you going to be able to account for us and move us appropriately up the chain, if you will, so you can take care of your home state. So we often get the thumbs up indication, but we'll see when that time comes and the dollars start rolling in. We are looking at an organizational structure to support this. As Nate indicated, that does not necessarily mean that we're looking at hiring state FTEs. We know there's a lot of roles and functions that there's a need at the moment. There's a need later in the process. It's not necessarily something that we need a full-time employee sitting at doing day after day, month after month. And so we're looking at creative ways of leveraging our vendor community to potentially provide some of that capability and resources for us, so they can sit there and bring the right resource in at the right time as Nate and team are in the need. And there's going to be certain things that we are going to staff with employees. As you look at attorney or legal type things, we're not going to have a vendor providing legal. We're going to have to utilize our attorney or bring in additional attorney resources, just using that as an example. And then the other thing too, Gerald, to your point, and Nate was talking about this, is really looking at a grant management system, or how we go about doing the disbursement and accountability of these dollars. Because I'm sure as our Madam Auditor is there patiently waiting to ask her question, this is $1 billion. I'm sure she's going to have a vested interest of coming in and taking a look at things, and we want to make sure that when those doors open up and our state auditor and her team comes in, that we're able to fulfill what she's looking for. So On that note, I'll turn it over to you, Madam Auditor, for your question.
And you've hit right on, Jim, exactly what my question was going to be about. I've seen this federal money come in the door, and we are anxious to get it out to help people, and we should be. But what we have not been good at is understanding for the amount of money we have, not necessarily did we spend it in the right place, but did we duplicate effort? Did we overpay? Did we wastefully spend? And did we in the end set up expectations and then hold people accountable for that money? Mm-hmm. All of this federal money coming in the door is North Carolina's chance to not only get recovered from COVID-19, but really put us in a better place than we were before COVID-19. And so Jim's exactly right. We're going to be watching this $1.2 billion spend from the very beginning. We're going to be looking at not only how do you plan to spend it, but how do you plan to set up metrics or hold vendors or counties or whomever accountable for what they plan to do with it. And then were you measuring along the way so that when you get to the end of the spend, we reasonably spent it and we obtained everything we absolutely could. So Jim's right to caution you that these are things that we are going to be looking at, but we're going to be looking at them sooner rather than later. We will not wait till you get to the end of the spend and then say, wow, this is what you did wrong.
Thank you for that, Madam Auditor.
And Madam Auditor, we know that you're going to be looking over our shoulder, and we're getting prepared for that. Gerald, did you have any other questions before we move on to Tracy?
The only other question that I would have is, obviously we can't inventory services, but we could, it appears, or in my mind, we could inventory conduit and fiber. It's only going to go up in price. And I'm just wondering if the state couldn't inventory this for these grants that are going to be forthcoming. And maybe they can't, but to me, by the time the legislature has decided on how much they're going to spend, and then we start going through the process of getting these grants proposals, by that time, the price of conduit and fiber is going to be through the roof. And it just seems to me that if we were able to buy it and inventory it at the state level, it would save us a lot of money. I'm just saying.
I think it's an excellent point, Mr. Poplin. My understanding is DIT does not have the ability to stockpile conduit currently, but we are, like I said, working closely with industry, both on the provider side and on the material side, to the internet provider side and the material side, to hopefully address manufacturing capacity and make sure that we're well positioned to move forward on these projects.
Tracy, we'll move over to you for questions.
Great. No questions, just comment on this or suggestion. I would urge us to think about the North Carolina ecosystem of providers and supporters in this space. And here that's a both overt and explicit nod to the role that MCNC has played in being a connector of what we would call community anchor institutions, everything from libraries to healthcare to the universities and education. It makes them an ideal, in my estimation, and in full disclosure, I'm on their board, so I know them pretty well. It makes them a really good middle mile provider, meaning that we do not need to necessarily pay commercial vendors to get everywhere. We need to pay commercial vendors to extend from where we collectively, North Carolina, already are. I think there is a really good story we weave together of this, putting the strengths of DIT and the state together with the effectiveness that MCNC has had in actually getting the shovels in the ground, so to speak, and building out and deploying fiber. And I say this with tremendous respect for that work, because we've actually partnered with them. We have built out a fiber network that connects all of our hospitals already here, and clinics that we have out of Duke. And so this idea of finding ways to team up and to collaborate and to share networking capacity amongst all the state agencies, institutions, and private activities, this is something that if we don't get better on, we're going to be killed in a figurative sense. But if we do get good at it, North Carolina could not just be in sort of the top 5 that we saw at the beginning. We could be up there at number 1 if we could just get beyond the proprietary aspects of, no, this is mine and I can't share any of it with you. Because these days, with the virtualization of technologies, including the virtualization of networks, it is perfectly practical for us to share one conduit and one pipe in many ways. So I just a impassioned plea that we all do this together. And I know there's great capacity for DIT and for the state to come on board with this, but I'd also urge us all to think about collectively where and how we can best utilize all the resources brought to bear, including private education, including corporations, and otherwise.
Yeah, so Tracy, you bring up a great point, and one of the things that Nate and I are really focusing in on is really about data, and leveraging data to help us make effective decisions, especially targeting opportunities. That's one of the areas that we're going to be leveraging the governor hopefully for, to help work with some of the provider community here, is to, you know, whether it's non-disclosure or something, somehow we have to get access to their data to understand what connectivity may already exist to certain households that aren't otherwise active. You know, what's the barriers that's preventing a household from, is it the affordability piece? Is it the lack of devices? Whatever the case may be, and how do we start? So we're not reinventing the wheel, to your point, but we can't leverage the census block data. That's too much of a slippery slope for us, and it's too general. We got to get down to the household level, and especially if we want to start looking at how are we making a difference across all our racial subdivisions here in North Carolina as well. That household data is going to be key for us to make sure that we're achieving the outcomes we're looking for. I appreciate your comments about MCNC and the middle mile aspect. Last month, I see my communications directors online here. Nicole and I got to go out to the little town of Baden, where Windstream was providing 1 gig symmetrical. And I'll say that again, 1 gig symmetrical, because I don't even have that in the apartment I live at here in Raleigh, for $27 a month. And it was going out to 630 households. And, you know, as part of their onboarding of households, they were very much active in registering people for the emergency broadband benefit, which again, you know, which was actually paying for the connectivity in a lot of cases. So there's a lot of ways, you know, that P3 type opportunity you talked about. There's so much more that I think we could be doing and need to be doing, but it's going to all be around that data and how we get our hands on that data to help drive decision making. Nate, I don't know if there's anything else you want to chime in on, or.
No, I think the map, you know, having a true sense of who's served, who's unserved, and who's underserved, I think is critical here. One thing I would note, since you brought up middle mile, I think especially with that state county RFP match and partner approach, I think our hope is that the market will respond, taking into account existing middle mile resources there. And so I think that MCNC and other providers like that, I think, will be critical enablers of a lot of these projects. The other thing we should mention that I didn't say in the key presentation, but we're also closely watching the Federal Infrastructure and Jobs Act that has passed the U.S. Senate and is currently hopefully passing the U.S. House very, very soon. That would bring additional funds to the state for digital literacy, for broadband access, and specifically for middle mile investment, because all of the ARPA funds that we're talking about, the American Rescue Plan funds, are geared toward that last mile, last user approach that Jim referenced earlier. So I think there are additional opportunities coming down. North Carolina is really well suited compared to nearly every other state in the nation with MCNC and other middle mile resources in the state. So I think that'll help us move more quickly once we can get going. But I think there are additional opportunities coming.
Okay. Any other questions, comments? Okay, not seeing any. So thank you, Nate, very much. Glenn,
Thank you.
constituent portal. I know sometimes it stinks to be last, but
That's okay. Let me go ahead and share the screen. Are you able to see my screen?
yes, you're not in presentation mode though.
Yeah, that's what I was pressing right now, just to make sure you guys can see.
There you go.
Okay. So wanted to give you an update on the constituent portal design effort. Keith Briggs is on that committee. One thing we want to stress, and I think we mentioned before, that committee is mostly made up of business representation, including communications staff, since they're the ones also dealing directly with the customers of their agency's business. So it's great to have their direct feedback and input as we move forward. As far as the design itself, we've come up with a information architecture that you'll see when I show some of the wireframes, and also looked at different personas, obviously, to be able to handle those and improve the content relative to those personas, whether it be a veteran, a resident, someone looking to open a new business, a visitor, et cetera. And one thing that I know we said citizen portal, but we're calling it constituent portal because really what we're representing are the residents, the businesses, potential businesses, and visitors to the state. So one of the things we've been doing over the last few months also is what we call tree tests. And what that does is have some of our users run through example searches to find services. And actually, we have a pool of what we call virtual residents. A few months ago, we were up to 400, and now we're up to 600 plus users that help us test out new sites, new changes to the sites, and in this case, the constituent portal to get direct feedback from those residents. And based upon those tree tests and that new information architecture, we've been able to develop new wireframes and incorporate a new theme development. In the process too, you've probably heard that our digital comments platform that hosts 60 plus websites and is mobile responsive, we moved to Drupal 8 and we're actually upgrading to Drupal 9 next week. The reason that is important, heard others speak to availability of broadband or connectivity being obviously an issue we want to address. With the Drupal 8 and Drupal 9, it optimizes or actually minimizes the data that has to be delivered to that end user. So this should also help ones in rural communities and others that have limited bandwidth to be able to still be able to access those services, especially through the web as well as the mobile channel itself. And again, with all our efforts, I think Jim mentioned it before, we're making sure that we're addressing multiple channels, mobile, web, and others to make sure we're able to serve all different types of users or personas going forward. One of the things we mentioned last time and had mentioned to the constituent portal committee, we've worked on a standard, what we call how-to content type, that we want to be able to use across all the agencies in terms of consumption of services, such that if a resident, visitor, or a business goes to transact with the state, they're familiar with that content type and they know that will enable them to kind of step through and see what's expected to be able to consume that service going forward. So in terms of the wireframes that we can show you based upon the new information architecture, as well as the search capability, let me go ahead and show you some of the efforts here. Make sure it comes up. Are you able to see my browser? yet?
No, it's still your PowerPoint.
Yeah, let me go ahead and go share the actual browser because it's not clicking over. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. This is just wireframes. Obviously, they're not mobile responsive. But one of the things we wanted to point out, the new information architecture, and this is similar to some of the other states as far as organizing that architecture and being able to find the information. We have living, working, learning, exploring, your government. Keith Briggs obviously is very familiar with this information architecture. And we're also doing a little bit of rebranding. Obviously, nc.gov is the portal, but we're kind of making that stand out a little bit more in terms of the brand going forward. And one of the things on the first page here, this new constituent portal, we're looking to launch by the end of December, and with this new information architecture as well as the how-to content type, including also a new search capability that's optimized. Keith Collins mentioned it, and we made a point in this first phase to improve that capability. In the past, when you've searched for like license, you can get several tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of results. So what we're going to be doing is incorporating new search optimization capabilities to basically, as you start typing in, like for license, it will bring up the typical license based upon usage that constituents normally interact with: a driver's license, a hunting and fishing license, alcohol permitting license, etc., to make it a much better user experience and get to what they need to transact with or consume that service. One of the other things, this is just a different view as well in terms of the search results that may come up going forward to make it easier for that user to find that information going forward. And it still has the information architecture up at the top here. And looking at it from another view, in terms of some of the popular topics we'll bring forward to show the constituents in terms of how do I find a state job, start a business, renew a vehicle registration, etc. Ones that are heavily used based upon the data analytics behind, we'll be pushing some of those popular topics up under that search bar to make it easier for those constituents to find the information they need. And this is just a mobile view. Obviously, when we go testing, we're not only looking at the web and the different browsers, but also what it looks like on mobile. Everything we do on the platform will be responsive, which means it will resize itself appropriately to the given browser window, as well as the browser windows on the mobile platform going forward. And this is just another view in terms of if I'm drilling down into the information architecture for working. Key things that will be coming up based upon data analytics we've seen in terms of what's most important to the constituent: finding a job, starting a business, professional licensing and permits, unemployment, taxes, workers' rights and safety. And within these as well will be that how-to content type that will be represented throughout going forward. And the last one kind of drills into more, what would that how do I content type look like? It basically will be kind of stepping through that user or constituent. Okay, what do I need as prereqs? What is the first step, the second step, and what to expect going forward to be able to actually finally reach that outcome of updated driver's license, a registration, a permit. Again, as others have said, our focus here is on the user experience from the outside in, not inside out, going forward to improve that customer's journey or the constituent's journey going forward. Let me go ahead and return back to the slide deck here. And one of the things we're doing, Keith is aware of this. We do have a design team that works on the user experience, the information architecture, the how-to content type, but we also have a team working on portal capabilities. And I think some of you have mentioned it before in earlier discussions. What we want to be able to do is identify technically what capabilities we need to enable a better user experience, but also enable the business to be able to transform and enable a better user experience for the constituent. So we have a team that's looking at portal capabilities required on that platform or platforms to help the business transform more easily, but then also have a better user experience. One of the key things several of you have mentioned before is we need to make sure that we're identifying standard solutions for those key capabilities that each agency will utilize to help break down those silos across the agency, such that the user doesn't need to know which agency to transact with. So some of the key capabilities we are looking at and have identified are identity and access management, which you've seen in the digital transformation charter and strategy going forward. Content management. As you mentioned before, I mean, we've got to make sure that our content is concise and clear for that constituent, and also that it can be repurposed and syndicated across different channels. So it's important to make sure that a user can understand that content, whichever channel they're executing on going forward. Other is application and data integration, with Keith Collins and others on the Digital Transformation Committee had mentioned, are going to be critical in terms of capabilities we need to be able to integrate across systems, but then also building long-term that one constituent profile and enabling them later on to potentially opt out of certain data being leveraged across the agencies themselves. Transactions. We are looking at, okay, which platform can we standardize on for transactions with the state agencies? One of those in discussion right now is Pay It. So we're looking at also a draft policy associated with adopting a standard for transactions across agencies. That solutions capabilities team is currently looking at that and is going to give us feedback. Looking at accessibility, how can we ensure that what we're doing reaches all the different types of constituents going forward, and they're easily able to consume that information, as well as more capabilities. But as we have the tombstone at the bottom there represents, with all this effort, we need to make sure we're identifying standard capabilities versus duplicating those across the platform to enable a better user experience. So that is one of the key principles that team's undertaking as they look at capabilities across this ecosystem. And in terms of kind of demonstrating some of the leveraging some of those capabilities, as well as moving forward with a better user experience and information architecture, we are engaging with the Secretary of State to revisit what we've tried in the past, probably around 2010 and 2015, to enable a better business one-stop shop for the constituents in starting a business or registering and keeping up to date their business licensing going forward. The other one is we are already engaged with that how-to content type with DHHS, as well as Wildlife Resources Commission and DMV, as well as other agencies, to start implementing that how-to content type earlier in the process, such that we launched in December and January. We have several of those key areas of consumption for the constituent already covered with that how-to content type. And we are identifying other pilot options with that constituent portal steering committee to be able to improve that constituent user experience going forward. This is basically phase one, and then phase two obviously is taking all those capabilities identified and hopefully identifying other standard capabilities to adopt across agencies and reaching out to those agencies for high volume transactions with the constituents and working with those agencies to improve that user and customer journey experience going forward. So hopefully at the next strategy board meeting, we'll actually be able to walk you through actual live content that's being implemented and give you an update on some of those pilot options going forward as to what we've addressed and if we've implemented anything, how that user experience has been improved going forward. That's just a brief update as to where we are on these efforts. And I'll just open it up to any questions right now, and Keith can weigh in too, if, based upon what we've done with that constituent portal steering committee, he may want to add anything to what I've mentioned thus far.
Overall, Glenn, great job, good representation. I think the team has done well, you know, with some of the foundational elements of getting it going. I do think, in a reiteration, one thing that's not depicted in that presentation, but it is depicted in the workstream committee itself, and that is, we realize that one of our biggest hurdles is getting adoption by the actual agencies themselves. And so we've expanded the committee to get more inclusion that hopefully will then drive success, right? So we need to find the wins. We need to publish the wins. We need to find additional advocacy, and then we need to keep it going, right?
Yep, keep the momentum going. Like you said, get the quick wins to show the value they can bring to the business as well as constituent, and then keep moving forward. And key aspect of it is, like you said, getting adoption to move forward, utilizing these standard capabilities and approaches, but then also communicating and marketing the successes often. Are there any other questions? A lot of what we're doing on this obviously dovetails well and supports the digital transformation efforts we have that were mentioned earlier in the meeting.
So Glenn, looks like Kelly has a question.
Actually, I have a comment. I'm Deputy Secretary at the Department of Administration, but for 15 years, I was Deputy Secretary at the Secretary of State's office, and I'm actually on Glenn's steering committee. And I just want to say, you know, I've been involved in this for 15 years, more than 15 years, really. And so I'm really excited about what I've seen come out of this effort. First of all, the navigation that is plain language and really meets people where they are, rather than, you know, we tend to think of things in terms of how we're structured, but that's not how people think. And so I'm really excited to see how this is going to transform how we relate to the public. The other thing that I think is a real win out of this is once someone forms a business, getting them in the pipeline for, they need to get workers' comp insurance, they need to be registered with this, that, or the other, to where people are not getting gigged on the backside and they were ignorant. They maybe aren't as sophisticated, maybe don't have the money to have an attorney help them set everything up. And the more that we can make our bureaucracy easier for them to manage and handle, the better off everyone's going to be. And so I'm just so excited to see the progress that's being made on this. So thank you very much.
And to add to that, one of the things that was surprising is during the pandemic, we had a 50% increase in business licensing during the pandemic thus far.
Okay, any other questions, comments? Madam Auditor, your hand's still up. Did you have a question, ma'am, or was that up
Yes.
from before? Oh, okay, go ahead, ma'am.
More than, it's not a question, it's really a comment. I just have to say, Jim, to you and the committee members, Mr. Popland and I were very discouraged and frustrated over 2 years of nothing going on with this committee. And I just have to tell you how impressed I am today. This committee looks like it is so headed in the right direction of what the General Assembly always intended for it to be. And I'm extremely excited for the citizens of North Carolina with where this committee is taking the IT efforts. So I just didn't want the meeting to end today to say, after sitting on this committee and being very frustrated for 2 years, I am excited about where all of the committee is. And I realize it's your leadership, Jim. I realize it's who you picked to head up the two strategy committees and then all the other presentations I've heard today. So again, kudos to this committee and where we are headed for the citizens of North Carolina.
And Madam Auditor, I gotta thank you as well, because remember our first meeting, as I sat on your couch and said, give me a chance, we'll get there, and you gave me the chance. So I'm glad to hear that we're meeting expectations. So thank you so much.
And you're right. I was saying I've got lots to do, and
yes.
I'm just going to sit on a committee and I was going to ask to be taken off, and you said give me 6 months. Well, you delivered. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. And I got a great team with me as well, so I cannot take all the credit by any stretch of the imagination. With that said, our next meeting is December 10th. We don't have the 2022 meetings yet scheduled. I'm sure the team will be rocking and rolling to look out and start carving some valuable time off your schedules for those upcoming quarterly meetings. I just want to conclude by, again, just saying I very much sincerely thank you, Tracy and your team, Jeff and your team. Again, like I said, Tracy, your gang, digital transformation is something that means a lot to me. Not that cybersecurity doesn't. I want to make sure we, but I really think digital transformation is where we're really going to make a lot of inroads and provide a lot of value to North Carolinians. At the end of the day, that's who we're all here for, is North Carolinians. And so I applaud your efforts. We're gonna reconvene here after this, at least internally, and see how do we want to pivot here and start getting to next steps and keep the momentum going across these areas. As we go into 2022, I am sincere about engaging the IT strategy board for how do we go about looking at prioritization of IT projects and looking at criteria and evaluation, weighting of that criteria, so we can start getting some transparency in the process as well. And again, more collaboratively working across our agency partners, so they have an understanding of how we're going to be looking and evaluating things. Too often everything's a mandate. Well, you know what? If we're in government and almost everything we do is a mandate, so a mandate should not necessarily be an overriding criteria, because the overarching mandate we have is to better North Carolina, and so everything I would hope that we're doing better is North Carolina in the end. So with that note, again, thank you all. Thank you for the commitment to 3 hours. I can't believe that yesterday we talked about the fact that we didn't think we had 3 hours worth of work here. Hopefully you all snuck out like I did and got a quick bio break as everything was going on, because if you didn't, God love you. But with that said, I want to thank everybody. We're going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting and see you in December. Take care, everybody.
See you later, everybody.
Thanks.